Chapter 496. 8,000-word chapter. There was no doubt that Reki City was the focus of the dark world tonight. The Caesar Hotel was the focus of Reki City. In the information age, all the information was transmitted at the speed of a phone call. If one was a little more cautious, it was just a matter of a satellite-encrypted phone call. On the evening of August 17th, the military of Wulong State tried its best to besiege the Caesar Hotel, where the Shadow Throne was located. This was not a secret at all. As soon as the war broke out, such explosive news had spread throughout the dark world. It had been nearly an hour since the war began. All the forces hidden in Reki City, who thought they were qualified to play, and who tried to fish in troubled waters gathered near the Caesar Hotel at this time. Most people had witnessed the process of the Shadow Throne's dissolution. It seemed to be just a few words, but God knew how much Wulong State, Li Tianlan, or Samsara Palace had to pay to get the top-secret information inside the Shadow Throne. All the major forces had been quietly observing the fighting and division inside the Shadow Throne. After a short period of time, they finally confirmed a fact. Wang Tianzong was really not in the Caesar Hotel, and everything that happened tonight would not be a joint act between the Snowdance Corps, the Wang family of Beihai, and the Shadow Throne. After confirming this fact, everyone saw a huge opportunity in front of them. The Shadow Throne was disbanded. Rothschild, which occupied several developed countries in Europe, lost all the forces around them to protect them. Paul William Wang Rothschild, the current patriarch of Rothschild, who everyone thought did not know martial arts, also revealed the strength of the invincible realm. There was no doubt that this was Rothschild's last trump card. In Reki City, which the Wang family of Beihai could not take care of, they would break Rothschild tonight. In the basement headquarters of the military rear of Wulong State, Qin Shilai, the Dark Swordmaster of Eastern Europe, straightened up the moment he saw Paul appear. Prime Minister Rieker, who had been standing beside him, took a few steps back subconsciously. He couldn't tell what kind of feeling it was, but he vaguely felt that Qin Shilai seemed to have changed when Paul appeared. Previously, Qin Shilai had been quietly watching the war in front of the Caesar Hotel. He watched General Prance destroy the inner defense line of the Shadow Throne, the fight inside the Shadow Throne in King Tong's choice, and the large number of troops in Wulong State being wiped out. In the Shadow Kingdom and the ice-sealed tomb, King Tong's figure flashed in his sight again and again with blood. Qin Shilai had been silent, calm and gentle, but there was only indifference in his eyes. However, the appearance of the current patriarch of Rothschild, Paul, made him completely focused in an instant. This change was very obvious, and it was getting more and more obvious. He stood there quietly. As time passed, his figure gradually became a sharp sword in Rick's eyes, distant, sharp, deep, and solemn. Qin Shilai squinted at Paul on the screen, and remained silent for a long time. I didn't expect His Highness to be telling the truth. He suddenly muttered to himself, his tone somewhat complicated. Li Tianlan's plan tonight was simple but extremely huge. His plan made full use of all the advantages he had accumulated in Wulong State. It was extreme and crazy. The first half of the plan was aimed at the Shadow Throne. The moment Prance stimulated the nerves of the Shadow Throne, and the Jodl family withdrew from the Shadow Throne, the plan could be said to have been a success. The middle stage of the plan was aimed at Rothschild. It was not aimed at King Tong. It was aimed at the entire Rothschild. It was Li Tianlan who told him about Paul's strength. He had no intention of destroying this unique financial family in Europe, but he never thought about not destroying it. To be precise, he didn't care. What he wanted was to completely destroy the power of Rothschild in the dark world. King Tong was going to die. Paul was going to die too. He had to die. No country or force in the world dared to underestimate Rothschild. It was a murderous weapon second only to the human emperor. It had two experts of the invincible realm. It had a deep foundation. It could cover the sky with one hand in countless fields in Europe. Its wealth was so huge that it was almost beyond the imagination of ordinary wealthy families. In countless fields, Rothschild was a giant beast that could easily devour everything. In recent years, it had drifted away from the Lin clan, and the Qin clan in Eastern Europe had returned to the Lin clan. Rothschild had also become the most important ally of the Wang family of Beihai, and it was a force that drifted away from Zhongzhou State. For Li Tianlan, Rothschild drifted away from Zhongzhou state, which was tantamount to drifting away from the rules. He was no match for Wang Tianzong, far from it. The Li family was no match for the Wang family of Beihai, far from it. If Li Tianlan wanted to survive in the shadow of Wang Tianzong and the Wang family of Beihai, the only thing he could rely on was the rules. The rules were the general trend and position. Li Tianlan was most certain that he and Wang Tianzong both belonged to Zhongzhou state. Under any circumstances, even if he left Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong would not dare to kill him blatantly. He could only rely on some forces that drifted away from Zhongzhou state. Rothschild was the force that posed the greatest threat to Li Tianlan. As long as Rothschild was destroyed, most of his and Wang Tianzong's power could only be limited to the rules. If Li Tianlan wanted to survive, it would be much easier. Moreover, any force needed a broad foundation to develop. Li Tianlan now had many allies. The Lin clan, the Samsara Palace, the Dark Knights, the Qin clan in Eastern Europe, Sai City, the Dongqing clan, the Jade Pool, Mount Shu, and even the Shadow Sect. This was a huge force that was enough to make anyone look sideways. It was also the biggest capital that Li Tianlan could play with Wang Tianzong within the rules of Zhongzhou state. And his many allies also meant that he needed a lot of development opportunities. If Rothschild was destroyed, there would be a big blank space in the sphere of influence of most developed countries in Europe. England, France, the Rising Sun City, Italos, Germany. These were all benefits that Li Tianlan could share with his allies, and even slowly digest by himself. However, with the division of the Shadow Throne, if Rothschild was really destroyed tonight, the Vatican was bound to dominate Europe. As High Priest Hall said, after dispelling the shadow of Europe, the Vatican was bound to spread the glory of God all over the dark world. Therefore, if the medium-term plan succeeded, it would mean that the honeymoon period of the Snowdance Corps and the Vatican's short-term cooperation would be completely torn apart at the beginning. Therefore, the ending plan for the second half would be extremely grand and brilliant. On the screen, Paul and King Tong gave up all the people in the Shadow Throne and moved straight forward. Some experts in the Shadow Throne, who could be regarded as King Tong's trusted subordinates, followed behind the two of them. Paul didn't care about them and didn't expel them, but he wouldn't deliberately wait. The whole night sky was constantly torn apart as he walked. In the deep darkness, the messy rain exploded piece by piece. The void was turbulent and vibrating, and the light was devoured. Paul's figure became more and more blurred. As he walked over, blood splashed everywhere. A large area of the void was constantly solidified, and the whole night sky was dyed with extremely dark colors. Qin Shilai's expression became more and more solemn. After all, Li Tianlan's intelligence made a mistake, a big mistake. According to the intelligence, Paul's current strength was in the invincible realm, but he should not be stronger than King Tong. He was probably in the latter half of the divine list. But in his eyes, how could Paul not be stronger than King Tong? He walked calmly in the crowd against the hail of bullets, stained with blood all the way. Such momentum was much stronger than King Tong's. Even if King Tong made another breakthrough, she would not be stronger than the current Paul. Paul was not at the peak of the invincible realm yet. But vaguely, Qin Shilai could feel that in the whole dark world, Paul might be the invincible realm expert who was closest to the peak of the invincible realm. The sword intent whistled around Qin Shilai and turned into a faint storm. The famous sword cutting edge, which was famous in the dark world, trembled slightly behind him. It seemed to be excited and joyful. Qin Shilai slowly held the hilt of the sword and pulled out the blade. The blade was extremely bright. But in the battle with Jiang Qiansong that day, cutting edge showed some slight cracks because it couldn't bear the sword intent of Li Tianlan and him. Qin Shilai looked at cutting edge in his hand quietly. Cutting edge was flawed, but his eyes were full of deep affection. "Your Highness." Riker couldn't help taking a step forward. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Qin Shilai glanced at him and didn't say anything. "Your Highness, my army can't stop Paul and King Tong," Riker said in a heavy voice. Stopping a team led by an invincible realm expert and stopping an invincible realm expert were two completely different concepts. A team naturally had a stronger combat capability. However, stronger combat power was never used to break out of an encirclement, but to kill. In the crowd, if an invincible realm expert ignored his team, the possibility of success in breaking through the crowd was almost infinite. The most important thing was that they were not only besieging King Tong now, and Paul, an even more powerful Paul, an invincible realm expert who was really infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, only half a line away, or even less than half a line, was leading King Tong, an invincible realm expert on the divine list. The two of them broke through the encirclement like two ferocious tigers. The surrounding troops of Wulon State were non-entities. Many ants can kill an elephant. That's because elephants are too clumsy. Even if the tiger couldn't beat it, couldn't it run away? Tonight, Wulon State had formed a blood feud with Rothschild. It was an irreconcilable blood feud. After sacrificing so many troops, Rieker had no choice but to do his best to destroy Paul and King Tong. At this time, he really hoped that Qin Shilai could come forward to restrain him. Qin Shilai looked at his watch and waited silently. He was still waiting for a call. It was Li Tianlan's call. Li Tianlan's plan was too crazy. If he took action one step earlier or one step later, it might have an irreversible impact on the final outcome. He had to wait for an accurate signal. The phone rang abruptly, and it sounded a little ear-piercing in the silent headquarters. Rieker's body trembled. In Qin Shilai's hands, a large number of sword shadows filled with sharpness. He picked up the phone, put it to his ear, and said hello. Let's do it. Li Tianlan's voice was low and determined. Qin Shilai was silent. There was a huge mistake in the estimation of Paul's strength in the intelligence. He was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, and the invincible realm expert in the second half of the divine list. On paper, there was not much difference between the two realms. This was a small mistake. But in the actual war, this was the most fatal mistake. But it was too late for Li Tianlan to adjust his own plan. This is a lesson. Li Tianlan said softly, "From now on, I will pay attention." Qin Shilai smiled bitterly. He understood what Li Tianlan meant. Li Tianlan was now in a high position of power, but after all, he was not an old fox who had been struggling in the dark world. His temper was too extreme and crazy, so he subconsciously did not leave any room for himself. Now all his strength had been used to the extreme. A slight change would affect the whole body. There was no possibility of change. So even if there was a fatal mistake in the estimation of Paul's strength, the plan could not be stopped. Let's do it. He could only do it. Qin Shilai suddenly clenched the sharpness in his hand and said calmly, "I'm going now." For all the dark forces, Paul's sudden appearance in Reki City was a complete accident. And Paul's strength was even more of an accident. In Reki City, the military of Wulon State was still desperately moving forward. But Paul, with his golden eyes, seemed to ignore everything. He walked in a straight line. He rushed forward. There was no detour, no dodging. The void, which was distorted to the extreme, vibrated without stopping. A large amount of blood and bones flew all over the sky. The soldiers of Wulon State suffered more and more casualties, but Paul's expression was always calm, and the domain around him was always stable. At this moment, the patriarch of Rothschild, who had endured for many years and kept a low profile, completely shocked the whole dark world. In the church in the west of the city, Arsis, the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, watched this scene quietly through the screen with a solemn and gloomy expression. The heavy rain outside the window kept falling with the thunder, but in Arisis's eyes, there was only Paul on the screen. Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, stood beside Arsis in a veil. She was silent for a long time before sighing softly. "Rothschild is really scary. It's because he's scary that we can't let him live." Arsis calmed down and said in a calm voice, "Tonight is an opportunity." Angel did not speak. Arsis paused and continued, "If possible, I will take Paul down myself." Angel glanced at him. Under the white veil, her eyes were clear, but she frowned slightly. Arsis took a deep breath. Obviously, he was ready to fight with all his might. He was a real expert at the peak of the invincible realm. The Lin clan was hidden from the world. Before the appearance of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, Arisis's strength in the dark world could be said to be second only to the Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong. His peak of the invincible realm was extremely stable, Without any exaggeration. So he was the top expert in Europe. Now his position as the top expert in Europe was also stable. But Paul was infinitely close to his current level. Maybe it was just half a step, maybe it was just a small half step, and Paul would be on par with him. Arsis suddenly had a deep sense of crisis. Rothschild and the Shadow Throne could be said to be the biggest opponents of the Vatican. For many years, the Vatican had been silently encroaching on Rothschild's domain. This movement was very slow, but the Vatican was not in a hurry. After all, it was difficult for Rothschild to support the overall situation alone with King Tong. There was plenty of time for them to slowly lay out the plan. But tonight Paul, who was infinitely close to Arsis, appeared. Arsis was horrified. With Paul's strength, Rothschild could be said to be full of confidence. Over the years, when the Vatican had been silently plotting against Rothschild, who could be sure that Rothschild had not done something in secret? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. He knew how terrifying Rothschild was. He also knew that it was impossible for Rothschild not to do anything. But the problem was that the Vatican didn't see what Rothschild had done. Just because they couldn't see it didn't mean that it didn't exist. The most terrible thing was that they couldn't see it. Looking at Paul on the screen, the light in Arisis's eyes kept flickering, and finally turned into the most naked, killing, intent and fierce light. "No," Angel suddenly said. Arsis frowned and glanced at Angel. His eyes were a little blank, and he thought it was strange. What did she mean by no? "You won't kill Paul." Angel hesitated for a moment, and finally said it herself. Arsis was not angry. He just said calmly, "I don't understand what the Holy Virgin means. If Paul dies here, do you know what it means?" Angel looked straight into Arisis's eyes. Arsis nodded, and his eyes became calmer and calmer. "It means that we can sweep away all the forces of Rothschild in the shortest time. It means that we will become the unique and supreme force in all of Europe. It means that the strength of the Vatican will expand to be close to the time when the great Pope of Monlier controlled the Vatican." He looked at Angel and whispered, "Don't you want to see such a result, Your Highness the Holy Virgin?" His voice was steady, but there was a touch of undisguised sarcasm in his eyes. Angel was the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. Arsis was the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps. To the outside world, the Vatican had always claimed that Arsis was the Saint War Angel of the Vatican. But the status of the Saint War Angel was still slightly lower than that of the Holy Virgin. It was just that this difference in status had been reduced to almost non-existent under the vague attitude of the Pope many times. The Saint War Angel and the Holy Virgin were not on good terms. This was not a secret among the higher-ups of the Vatican. However, although the relationship between the two was bad, it was not to the point of life and death. Otherwise, the Holy Disarmament Corps would not have come to Eastern Europe with the Holy Punishment Priest group. The future is beautiful, but these are all your imagination. I don't deny that everything you said is possible, but that's in the future, Angel said calmly. Angel said calmly. Her voice was crisp and soft. God said that the future is tomorrow. Arsis had a proud look on his face. Angel glanced at him. Her eyes were calm, but there was a touch of something else in them. Tomorrow? Are you sure you can live to see tomorrow after killing Paul? Arsis frowned, snorted fiercely and said gloomily, I don't understand what you mean. You seem to have forgotten, Angel said softly, who split the Shadow Alliance tonight and even forced Paul out. Li Tianlan? Arsis raised his eyebrows. What can he do? It is said that he was seriously injured in the battle with Jiang Qiansong. Now that he has woken up, how much combat power can he keep? Even if he is in his heyday, what is he? In your eyes, Li Tianlan himself may be nothing, but don't forget that he now controls the entire Wulan state and the Snowdance Corps, the most elite army in the world. Angel said coldly. Arsis was silent for a while. Only Angel's voice sounded in the hall of the church. Did Li Tianlan create everything today for us to take advantage of? Your Highness Arsis, I don't deny that your vision just now is very beautiful, but Li Tianlan will also think of what you think. This is Reki City, a place where even Wang Tianzong can be imprisoned. We can forget about other things, but here Li Tianlan is the most powerful force. Li Tianlan destroyed the Shadow Throne. He and his allies around him are undoubtedly interested in the development opportunities of the developed countries in Europe. If you kill Paul and King Tong, the Shadow Throne will be torn apart, and Rothschild will disappear. Do you think Li Tianlan will watch us become the largest force in Europe? Or even become his strongest opponent after entering Eastern Europe? Arsis understood what Angel meant, but he was a little uncertain. He sneered and said, "Do you mean that if I kill Paul and King Tong, Li Tianlan will dare to attack me? He will attack the Vatican without hesitation," Angel said with great certainty. Arsis asked if he dared to do it. Angel answered whether he would or would not. For the young madman who dared to imprison Wang Tianzong, Angel really didn't think that there was anything he didn't dare to do. Paul must not be touched. I know that he is very powerful, but it is precisely because he is powerful that we need to keep him alive. You can kill King Tong tonight and leave Paul, who is a strong deterrent, behind. Angel's voice was almost an order. You can seriously injure Paul, but he must be alive. Our cooperation with the Snowdance Corps is now in the honeymoon period. After tonight, we can take over the theocracy of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe with Wulan State as the center. This is an area very suitable for the development of fanatics. The more believers we have, the stronger our power will be. As for Paul, we can let him leave Eastern Europe with serious injuries. King Tong has fallen, the Shadow Throne has split, and Rothschild has suffered heavy losses. When we have digested the interests of Eastern Europe, it will be a good time to break up with the Snowdance Corps. At that time, we will destroy Rothschild, and naturally, we won't have to worry about Li Tianlan. This is the best choice. Kill Paul tonight? I'm sure that as long as you dare to do it, you won't be able to leave Reki City. Arsis glanced at him, expressionless. Arsis can leave Reki City. Angel, you can also leave. The screen playing the war in front of the Caesar Hotel suddenly paused, and then the picture jumped. An old man in a white robe and holding a scepter appeared on the screen. His smile was calm and deep. Your Majesty. Arsis and Angel bowed at the same time. The Pope, dressed in a white robe, narrowed his eyes, glanced at Angel, and took a step forward. In the sight of Angel and Arsis, the Pope, who was thousands of miles away, seemed to step out of the screen and stand in front of the two of them. Arsis and Angel's bodies drooped lower and lower. Especially Angel, her whole body seemed to be trembling slightly. Arsis gave her a strange look. As the Holy Virgin, whose status in the Vatican was second only to the Pope, Angel should have played a role that could check and balance the Pope in some ways. However, Angel would inadvertently show extreme fear of the Pope on any occasion, and she would listen to the Pope's orders. As a result, the Pope became the real emperor in the entire Vatican. He could cover the sky with one hand, and his words carried enormous weight. As a result, the Vatican's style of doing things over the years had become more and more aggressive, and there was even a tendency to move closer to the super dark forces. Angel. The Pope's voice sounded gentle and calm. Your thoughts are reasonable. But do you really have such thoughts for the sake of the Church? Angel's delicate body shook violently. She lowered her head and said in a trembling voice, Your Majesty, I don't understand what you mean. You and I can both see Li Tianlan's plan. Paul's appearance surprised everyone. Now the strength he has shown has exceeded everyone's imagination. Arsis is now in the strongest state after being crowned. He can kill Paul without paying too much of a price. Are you really stopping him for the Vatican? Your Majesty, Rothschild still has infinite grace. Angel's voice was very low, like a whisper. Infinite grace has been lent to the Wang family of Beihai by King Tong. As the Holy Virgin of the Holy Punishment Priest Group, didn't High Priest Hall report to you? The Pope's voice was cold and light. Death Aria is in the charging period, but infinite grace is also not in Rothschild. Paul doesn't have a murderous weapon. If Arsis kills him, his injury won't be too serious. In this state, Arsis still has the ability to take you out of Reki City. At worst, what we give up is nothing more than some saint warriors and holy punishment priests. Even Melad may take advantage of the chaos to escape after the coronation. We will fall out with Li Tianlan, but cooperation is not eternal. The plan can't keep up with the changes. After Rothschild is destroyed, the whole of Western Europe, and even the whole of Europe, will be ours in the future. So what if we give up Eastern Europe for the time being? In order not to fall out with Li Tianlan, we limit ourselves to a few small countries in Eastern Europe. Who is putting the cart before the horse? Your Majesty, Angel forced herself to calm down. You can't underestimate Li Tianlan. I admit that he may become the chosen one in the future, but the premise is that he survives. Right now he is not qualified for me to pay attention to him. His Snowdance Corps is very strong. I am willing to give up all the Saint warriors in Eastern Europe. As long as the three of you can come back, we will win. We can give up the interests of Eastern Europe for the time being. Angel, do you have anything else to say? Angel felt powerless inside. In the end, the Pope made a mistake that perhaps all the big shots would make. The whole dark world knew that Li Tianlan was rising, and was the future chosen one. The whole dark world called Li Tianlan His Highness. But no real big shot was willing to give Li Tianlan enough respect. The reason was simple. Li Tianlan was too young. People might pay attention to a 22-year-old highness on the surface, but in their bones, no one would really pay much attention to him. Such an idea was rooted in the hearts of every big shot. Even they themselves did not know that they would have such an attitude towards Li Tianlan. What would happen if they despised Li Tianlan? Jiang Qianyan despised Li Tianlan and died. Black Ghost despised Li Tianlan and died. Jiang Qiansong despised Li Tianlan. And the Jiang family of South America suffered heavy losses. Jiang Qiansong was even expelled from the Jiang family of South America. His whereabouts were unknown, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. King Tong also despised Li Tianlan. If it weren't for Wang Tianzong's protection, King Tong would have died in the date of death 10 days ago. Wang Tianzong also despised Li Tianlan. Now the Sword Emperor was imprisoned in the office of the president. And now, the Pope also despised Li Tianlan. Because he was really too young. Angel didn't know what to say, so she could only repeat again. Li Tianlan is not so simple. Rothschild is not so simple either. The Pope took a deep look at her and said blandly, Angel, what you said makes sense, but you don't understand the horror of Rothschild. Paul's life is a bomb for the whole Vatican. The bomb must be dismantled. You have your reasons and I have my choices. Now you must carry out my orders, cooperate with Arcis and kill Paul. Angel was silent for a long time without saying a word. The Pope suddenly said, You don't want to kill Paul because you don't want to fall out with the Snowdance Corps too soon, right? Angel's body trembled, and she continued to be silent. You don't want to fall out with the Snowdance Corps for the Vatican? Or for yourself? The Pope's voice became more and more erratic. Angel, do you want to see him? Angel bit her lips so hard that her delicate red lips bled from the bite. Selfish. The Pope said calmly. His voice suddenly expanded, as if it had spread to the whole world. His loud and majestic voice occupied all of Angel's consciousness. Selfishness is a sin. Angel's body suddenly shook, and she subconsciously knelt in front of the Pope. The Pope looked down at Angel. After a long silence, he suddenly asked, Angel, where am I? He was in front of Angel, but he came out of the screen. The real Pope was still on the screen, thousands of miles away. You're in front of me. Angel replied naturally. So you still can't see through me. The Pope's voice was a little disappointed. He suddenly thought of a woman who even he felt extremely amazing. If it's Qin Weibai, she will see through everything I'm doing now. Angel lowered her head and said nothing. So in fact, she is more suitable to be the Holy Virgin of the Vatican than you. The Pope said, both in spirit and image. Angel continued to be silent. The Pope sighed softly and said slowly, Unfortunately, she is no longer a virgin. Qin Weibai was Li Tianlan's woman. This was something that the whole dark world knew. It was also a cruel fact that made countless experts in the dark world feel heartbroken. Angel's face suddenly turned pale. Under the veil, there was no trace of blood on her face. The Pope took a deep look at Angel and did not speak. His temperament was gentle, but a fierce light suddenly flashed in his eyes. It was like the light of a beast, violent, cruel, crazy, and disgusted. This fierce light was so bright and so obscure, like the wind and rain in the outside world at night, or like a precursor. Chapter 497. Killing an invincible realm expert and defeating an invincible realm expert were two completely different concepts. The road of martial arts in the dark world was broad, profound, and ever-changing. There were also strong and weak invincible realm experts. But in any case, as long as one entered the invincible realm, even if he was not on the divine and holy lists, he could be regarded as the peak of martial arts. On most battlefields, even if an invincible realm expert was defeated, if he wanted to run away, not many people could stop him. As for the two invincible realm experts who wanted to run away, there were naturally fewer people who could stop them. Moreover, at this time in Reki City, the two invincible realm experts who wanted to run away were not ordinary invincible realm experts. One of them was an expert who could rank in the top 5 of the divine list, and was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. King Tong was a little weaker, but she was also on the divine list. The army of Wulan State could not stop them. Everyone could clearly see this fact. King Tong and Paul were siblings, and their tacit understanding with each other was truly impeccable. The two of them joined forces, and the domains of the invincible realm crisscrossed in the army of Wulan State that kept rushing up. Blood splashed everywhere, and the scene was a complete massacre. Paul was breaking out of the encirclement to the south. Every superpower in the dark world had a secret base in Wulan State. The secret base of the Shadow Throne was in the south of Reki City. Although it belonged to the Shadow Throne, in fact, it was completely the power of Rothschild. From the site selection to the construction to the improvement of the defense system, all of them were undertaken by Rothschild. Most of the guards inside were also from Rothschild. A small number of outsiders also had absolute loyalty to Rothschild. Wulan State was very important. The secret base established in Wulan State was naturally also very important. For such an important secret base, Paul, as the patriarch of Rothschild, would definitely have it in his hands. Everyone who was sent to this base could be said to have been carefully selected by him. It was the 3rd day since Paul secretly came to Wulan State. During these 3 days, he had been staying in the secret base of Rothschild. No one knew the news, not even King Tong, which was enough to show that everyone in the base was completely reliable. The war at the Caesar Hotel broke out abruptly and violently, and the momentum was earth-shattering. Although Wulan State blocked the communication signal of the nearby block, Paul, who was at the base at that time, still received the news as soon as possible. From the time he left here and broke out of the encirclement to the present, the people of the secret base of the Shadow Throne should have been halfway there. At this time, if they broke out of the encirclement to the south, they could meet the elites of the secret base in the shortest time. Those elites were the men of sacrifice of Rothschild. At the most crucial moment, death warriors could play an unimaginable role, and their greatest role was to sacrifice themselves. To the south, in the crowd, Paul's body tensed up slightly. Around him, the domain that almost enveloped heaven and earth suddenly began to condense and shrink. The domain that enveloped everything turned into a halo revolving around him and King Tong. The heavy rain fell from above and instantly soaked his whole body, but the halo around him suddenly became bright. The bright light was thick and sharp, spinning wildly, like a millstone running to the extreme. Countless soldiers of Wulan State rushed over with weapons under the pressure of the soldiers in the rear, but they were instantly torn apart by the halo. Paul grabbed King Tong's hand tightly, and his speed suddenly accelerated. The 20th minute of breaking out of the encirclement. The streets of Wulan State were already covered with mountains of corpses and rivers of blood. The corpses of thousands of soldiers of Wulan State fell to the ground in disorder, and the smell of blood filled every corner of the air. Paul was still breaking out of the encirclement. Endless soldiers were still fighting, but most of the whole block had been cut through by Paul. Less than a few hundred meters ahead was the corner of the block. Paul's gaze passed through the dense army and looked at the end of the block. His eyes were blazing. Mitchell quietly looked at Paul, who was like a killing god in the sea of corpses and blood, and remained silent. Standing in his current position, he could see Paul's every move and expression without even looking at the monitor screen. He was in the south of the Caesar Hotel. The Heroes Club he led was also in the south of the Caesar Hotel. Paul broke out of the encirclement to the south, and he was getting closer and closer to the Heroes Club. Through the window, Everything about Paul became clear in Mitchell's sight. Mitchell narrowed his eyes. His eyes were solemn, and even a little nervous. He was the second in command of the Heroes Club. He was a newly advanced invincible realm expert in the Dark World. But at this time, the one approaching him could be said to be the most deeply hidden invincible realm expert in the Dark World. Even if he didn't care about King Tong, Mitchell was no match for Paul alone. Far from it. But now Paul was approaching his territory step by step. If he took action, he could temporarily stop Paul and King Tong for a while. If he didn't take action, in less than 10 minutes, Paul and King Tong might completely break through the encirclement of the army of Wulon State and retreat unscathed. Mitchell clenched his fists tightly, and there was hesitation in his eyes. "Your Highness Mitchell." In the Heroes Club, a female high-level official came over, and her voice was a little anxious. Mitchell glanced at her, then raised his head and looked around without saying anything. The army of Wulon State besieged the Shadow Throne, which was undoubtedly Li Tianlan's order. Li Tianlan contacted the Heroes Club. There was no reason not to contact other forces. So if there was no accident tonight, all the super dark forces should have joined hands to send the Shadow Throne and Rothschild out. At this moment, all the dark forces should have been present. But no one took action. However, in any case, it was impossible for the major forces to watch Paul and King Tong retreat unscathed. The Shadow Throne and Rothschild represented countless interests in Europe. Moreover, the major forces were fighting against each other. Who would let go of such a great opportunity to severely injure, or even destroy Rothschild? No one wanted to see Paul and King Tong leave. But the problem was that no one wanted to take the lead. As long as anyone took the lead, the others would definitely respond immediately. But Mitchell didn't want to be the first to take the lead, because the realm gap between him and Paul was too big. Moreover, if the Heroes Club took the lead and others hesitated for a few seconds, in the eyes of experts at Paul's level, there might be many opportunities to severely injure the Heroes Club. But Paul was getting closer and closer to them at this time. Why didn't he take action? The Heroes Club and Rothschild were not at peace. It could even be said that they were real enemies. In a long time ago, when the Vatican was at its zenith, Rothschild suffered heavy losses, and the Wang family of Beihai was weak. In the era when the Li family of Zhongzhou State had just appeared, there used to be a super-rich family called Habsburg in Europe. Today that era was called the Monlier era. That was the era when the greatest pope of the Vatican in hundreds of years almost swept the Dark World. The Habsburg family used to be one of the most reliable allies of Rothschild, but the relationship between the two sides was alienated by the Pope of Monlier. Rothschild fought against Habsburg, and the Habsburg family joined the Vatican in anger. Then the Pope from Rothschild went to heaven, and the Pope of Monlier succeeded the throne. As soon as the greatest pope took the throne, he expelled the Habsburg family, who had contributed the most to his ascension. As a result, the Habsburg family was jointly destroyed by the newly established Shadow Throne and the Vatican. A few escaped to South America. After hundreds of years of development, it became the current Heroes Club. When the Heroes Club was first established, it had been entangled with the Vatican and Rothschild, and they were always at loggerheads with each other. The presidents of the Heroes Club did not want to return to Europe or Germany, but to destroy Rothschild and the Vatican. This had even become an obsession that everyone in the Dark World knew. Tonight was the best opportunity to destroy Rothschild, an unprecedented opportunity in hundreds of years. Mitchell didn't want to make a move, but if Paul really rushed out of this block, what dignity and reputation would the Heroes Club have if the news got out? Dignity and reputation were both glory. The Dark World could ignore everything, but their own face was what they valued the most. Mitchell didn't want to make a move, but as Paul got closer and closer, he had to make a move. "Your Highness." The female high-level official standing behind Mitchell shouted again. Mitchell took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and suddenly said, "Wait a little longer." In fact, he didn't know what he was waiting for. But he really didn't want to be the first to make a move unless it was absolutely necessary. That direction. In an ordinary apartment in the east of the Caesar Hotel, Kassrotter, the leader of the men in black from Star State, looked in the direction where Paul had broken out of the encirclement. He frowned and said, "It should be." He hesitated for a moment and didn't continue. The Heroes building is directly south of the Caesar Hotel. If the people of the Heroes Club will come here, they are most likely to be in the south. Huan Kong, the ruler of the fantasy world, stood side by side with Cass Rotter. He looked south and said in a calm voice. Cass Rotter was silent for a while. He reached out to touch his carefully groomed thick beard, and didn't say anything. Charlemagne probably didn't expect things to develop to this point. Given his character, he won't come. Huan Kong continued. Cass Rotter nodded, narrowed his eyes and said, so the people of the Heroes Club can't stop Paul. They're just courting death. Huan Kong's voice became more and more indifferent. In Star State and even in the whole of North America, the structure of the Dark World was very simple. The Men in Black organization was the highest special warfare center in Star State, and its status was similar to Kunlun City in Zhongzhou State. The forces of the fantasy world were scattered all over North America, but their headquarters had always been in Toronto. Although there were occasional conflicts between the two superpowers, they always restrained themselves. Moreover, once something big happened, the fantasy world and the Men in Black would reach an agreement in the shortest time and form an alliance. Therefore, in many cases, the will of Huan Kong was equivalent to the will of Cass Rotter in North America, and Cass Rotter could easily command the fantasy world in many cases. This is not good. Cass Rotter was silent for a while and said in a deep voice. It's indeed not good. Huan Kong nodded. But it's not appropriate for us to take action now. The two of them had already decided on the direction of this action before Paul showed up here. Tonight could be said to be the most dangerous night in Rothschild. Its most powerful ally, Wang Tianzong, was imprisoned. The current patriarch of Rothschild even appeared in Recce City. The Shadow Throne was disbanded. The two top invincible realm experts in Rothschild were being besieged. Under such circumstances, Cass Rotter really hoped that all the major underground organizations would truly cooperate with each other. As long as they worked together to destroy Rothschild, the fantasy world and the Men in Black would have a chance to get out of the chaos in Eastern Europe. The chaos in Eastern Europe was far from over, but Cass Rotter had made up his mind that as long as Rothschild was destroyed, the Men in Black and the fantasy world would put down all their grievances, withdraw from Eastern Europe, and head straight for the root of Rothschild in Western Europe. This was not only the decision of the Men in Black, but also the demand of the Star State government. Before Zhongzhou State, Star State used to be the most powerful overlord in the world. Since it was surpassed by Zhongzhou State, the whole Star State could be said to be living in the shadow of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State had always claimed that they were peaceful and developmentalist, but in private, their extremely domineering style of doing things caused great pressure on Star State, and even made it difficult for them to move an inch in many cases. Under such circumstances, the only choice for Star State was to rope in several developed countries in the European Union to resist the increasingly powerful Zhongzhou State. However, in recent years, Zhongzhou State had used the relationship between the Wang family of Beihai and the Shadow Throne to make the European Union's attitude toward Star State more and more subtle. Although they would still be with Star State on major matters, the various private transactions made Star State, the former world overlord, extremely annoyed. If they could destroy Rothschild tonight, the Men in Black and the fantasy world would enter Western Europe together. They would join forces with the Vatican and take down everything that belonged to Rothschild in the shortest time, thus replacing the Shadow Throne as the new dark force in Western Europe. Replacing the Shadow Throne, the new force came from North America and could fully influence the European Union. At that time, Star State and the European Union would jointly restrain the footsteps of Zhongzhou State. Star State also hoped to surpass Zhongzhou State step by step through this action. This was a great plan related to the development of Star State in the next hundreds of years. Compared with it, giving up Eastern Europe was a price they could afford. Cass Rotter had received a call from the president of Star State not long ago, and they had reached a consensus on this matter. Therefore now the Men in Black and fantasy world not only carried his will, but also the will of the higher-ups of Star State. There's nothing inappropriate about it. Cass Rotter straightened his clothes. He said calmly, in other words, it's really inappropriate to let Paul and King Tong run away. I'm ready to take action. Don't worry. Huan Kong suddenly smiled and said softly, I understand your feelings, but I think someone will be more eager to kill Paul and King Tong than you and me. They won't be able to bear it. Let's wait a little longer. Who? Cass Rotter asked subconsciously. Li Tianlan. Huan Kong said softly. If we can't take down Rothschild tonight, Li Tianlan will definitely die when Rothschild takes revenge in the future. We don't want to let Paul and King Tong go, but Li Tianlan doesn't dare to let them go. He may be very strong now, but his capital can't withstand Rothschild's revenge, so he will definitely take action. We can just follow the Snowdance Corps and take action. After tonight, we will leave Eastern Europe immediately, and don't have to continue to tangle with him in Eastern Europe. Cass Rotter was silent for a while and nodded slowly. Every faction had their own plans. While everyone was thinking or discussing, Mellad, the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, was also paying attention to the increasingly tense situation. Paul was still rushing forward. The army of Wulon State was vast, but a large number of troops also meant that they were not flexible enough. In about half an hour, Paul and King Tong exerted their strength almost at the same time, and broke out of the encirclement in a straight line from the Caesar Hotel. In the endless rain of blood, the two of them directly cut a passage more than 2,000 meters long in the army of Wulon State. Now they were looking down at the battlefield from above. There were more and more troops of Wulon State behind King Tong and Paul, and in front of them, the army of Wulon State was becoming fewer and fewer. It's incredible. Mellad watched for a long time before he smiled happily. If we let them go tonight, Paul will definitely become famous in the dark world. In the next ranking of the divine list, Paul will even squeeze out Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, and directly enter the top 5 of the divine list. He will amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. Well, that's what it means to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat, right? Behind Mellad stood a few silent saint warriors. They were wearing the uniform of the Holy Disarmament Corps, which looked inconspicuous. But in fact, they were all experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, or even a half-step to the invincible realm. Hearing Mellad's words, several saint warriors looked at each other in dismay. Your Highness, what should we do now? The oldest saint warrior suddenly took a step forward and asked. I don't know. Mellad shrugged and said with a smile. What do you think they will ask us to do with the idiotic character of Arsis and the thinking of that old thing, the Pope? Idiot. Old thing. Almost no one in the dark world dared to use such words to describe Arsis and the Pope. As for within the Vatican, there was no one who dared to use such words. Obviously, when Mellad said this, he was not speaking as the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps, but as a follower. As for the few saint warriors, they were also not listening to this sentence as saint warriors. They were all Mellad's confidants cultivated within the Vatican. They were absolutely reliable confidants and even men of sacrifice. The oldest old saint warrior was silent for a while, as if he was thinking deeply. He was one of the most experienced saint warriors in the Holy Disarmament Corps. His code name was Sacred Feather. He was nearly 60 years old this year. His strength of a half-step to the invincible realm also gave him a strong prestige in the entire Holy Disarmament Corps. Recently, there were rumors in the Vatican that after the chaos in Eastern Europe, the second commander, Mellad, was likely to leave the Holy Disarmament Corps and serve as the new killing angel of the Vatican, which was the position of Aldak, who had been killed by Li Tianlan. Of course, Mellad was also likely to directly enter the Knights Templars and serve as the new head knight. If Mellad left, Sacred Feather would become the only candidate for the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps. With his position in the Holy Disarmament Corps, he could naturally get in touch with Arsis and even the Pope. Arsis will not let go of this opportunity, and neither will the Pope. Sacred Feather was silent for a long time before he spoke slowly. Why? Mellad asked with a smile of interest. Because of the history of the Vatican. Sanctum's tone was calm. Rothschild has had 2 popes. Your Highness, please note that it was 2 consecutive popes. So even today, Rothschild still has pawns in the Vatican that they can use. The tentacles they implanted in the Vatican are completely unimaginable. For hundreds of years, successive popes have issued orders to secretly eliminate the remnants of Rothschild. But Rothschild's pawns still exist and have not completely disappeared. They are the forces that understand the Vatican the most. They have a comprehensive understanding of how to overthrow the foundation of the Vatican, how to support the cardinals they support, how to cultivate holy virgins, and how to elect the Pope. They are very clear about all of them. Rothschild is not the most powerful in the dark world, but in the eyes of the Vatican, they can definitely be said to be the most powerful opponent. The Pope and Arcis also want to destroy Rothschild the most. The Vatican originally had a clear plan on how to deal with Rothschild, but all the plans were based on the premise that Rothschild only had one invincible realm expert, King Tong. But now it's different. The power that Paul has shown far exceeds that of King Tong. This will make Arcis and the Pope feel afraid, because they don't know why Paul has been enduring for so many years. They are worried that Paul has supported a large force in the Vatican for many years. With Rothschild's foundation in the Vatican, he is fully capable of doing this. So both the Pope and Arcis will do whatever it takes to kill Paul. Tonight is the best chance to kill Paul. Arcis is at his peak. If there are no accidents, I think Arcis should be here soon. Mellad nodded, clicked his tongue and murmured softly. Paul is not easy to deal with. If he joins forces with King Tong, it will be even more difficult to deal with him. Moreover, it's obvious that it's not just us and Rothschild tonight. There are also the Snowdance Corps, the Heroes Club, the Fantasy World, the Men in Black and the Dark Knights. I might not be able to handle it. His tone was very light, but it was extremely cold. Sacred Feather was taken aback. He said with rapt attention, Your Highness, you want to, it's not what I want. His Majesty said that he has a grudge against Arcis. Mellad smiled. At this moment, he was obviously not referring to the Pope. Sacred Feather bowed respectfully to show his respect towards His Majesty. After a moment of silence, he continued, Why don't we give His Majesty a call now? Good idea. As expected, Mellad took out his cell phone and dialed a number without hesitation. The call was quickly connected. A calm voice sounded, cold and indifferent. Hello. Your Majesty, this is Mellad. Mellad's voice was respectful. Speak. On the other end of the phone, His Majesty's voice became calmer and calmer. Paul, the Patriarch of Rothschild, has appeared in Recce City. At this time, he is breaking out of the encirclement with King Tong. Mellad's voice was fast and clear, and his words were very detailed. He used the shortest time to describe the current situation in the most detailed way, without missing any details. Because many details might not be a big deal in their eyes, but in the eyes of His Majesty, they might be great opportunities. On the other end of the phone, His Majesty was silent. After Mellad finished speaking, he held his cell phone and waited for the other party's next instructions. You said that the person who broke up the Shadow Throne was Prance, the Minister of Military Intelligence of Wulon State? His Majesty suddenly asked. Mellad was stunned, and then he replied, Yes. No wonder, no wonder. His Majesty muttered to himself and suddenly laughed. It turns out that he is a member of the Samsara Palace. No wonder the Samsara Palace led the chaos to Eastern Europe. Mellad didn't say anything. Of course, he knew that Prance was a member of the Samsara Palace. Otherwise, as a small minister of military intelligence of Wulon State, he might never come into contact with some secrets between the Vatican and the Shadow Throne in his life. The Samsara Palace has started to take action. His Majesty's voice was light. It seems that tonight will be very lively. What did the Vatican say? I haven't received any orders from Arcis or the Pope for the time being. Mellad replied respectfully. The Pope of this generation has the strongest desire for power, because their Holy Virgin is too weak. But at the same time, the Pope of this generation is also the most cautious and bold Pope. He is cautious because he is too afraid of the chess pieces that Rothschild has left in the Vatican. He is bold because he will not miss such a good opportunity to kill Paul. If I'm right, the order will soon be sent to you. Arcis will even personally take action and kill Paul and King Tong at all costs. His Majesty's laughter was cold and mocking. Your Majesty, then I? Mellad hesitated for a moment and asked softly. Just carry out the order. but pay attention to your safety. In such a situation, Rothschild may be able to make a comeback. Although Wang Tianzong is imprisoned, how do you know that Wang Tianzong has no other trump cards in Eastern Europe? I'll provide you with a few pieces of information. You deal with the situation over there carefully. His Majesty's voice was calm. Go ahead. Melad subconsciously bent down. First, if you meet someone with red eyes on the battlefield tonight, don't care what realm they are at, what combat strength they have, or how many people they have. Run with all your might. You can only be truly safe if you are more than 100 meters away from them. Second, Archbishop Lawrence of the Vatican is one of the most important chess pieces of Rothschild in the Vatican. If the Vatican is defeated and you are captured, this information can save your life when you face Paul. Third, the enemy of the enemy is a friend. In recent years, in addition to paying attention to Rothschild, the Eastern Church is also a big problem for them. You are in Eastern Europe, but you ignore the Eastern Church. You are extremely stupid. The last one is that the Morton family and the Violet family have reached a secret agreement a few years ago. The Morton family seems to be tentatively approaching the Vatican, but it's all fake. They are the most terrifying trump cards of the Eastern Church, and the Eastern Church will be the most important ally of Rothschild tonight. 4 pieces of information. His Majesty's tone was flat and indifferent, but in Melad's eyes, his voice made him feel a little dizzy. A person with red eyes? What the hell was that? It was absolutely safe to be more than 100 meters away from him. How did His Majesty calculate this distance? Was it calculated according to his combat capability of the invincible realm, or according to his real strength? Archbishop Lawrence. This was one of the most prestigious cardinals in the Vatican now. How could he be a chess piece of Rothschild? The Eastern Church. Morton. Violet's position. Melad suddenly came to his senses, but he found that he had unconsciously broken out in a cold sweat. Thank you, Your Majesty. He held the phone tightly, and his tone became more and more respectful. Stay alive. His Majesty said softly. He suddenly sighed softly and said slowly, Tonight is the trial day that she planned, right? It's destined to be a lively night. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss it. Melad was stunned. From what he said, could it be that His Majesty was coming to Eastern Europe? He hesitated and asked cautiously, Your Majesty, are you going to come to Eastern Europe? I will go. His Majesty said. I will definitely go. He didn't say anything more and hung up the phone. At the same time, Melad's other cell phone rang urgently. Melad glanced at the number. It was Arsis. Only then did he remember that he had called His Majesty to ask about Arsis. But now, he shook his head, picked up the phone and said calmly, Your Highness. Deputy Melad, I'm now conveying the order of His Majesty the Pope. Now, immediately attack the heretics of Rothschild and kill Paul at all costs. On the phone, Arisis's majestic and murderous voice sounded. It was heavy and piercingly cold. I will arrive at the battlefield in 5 minutes. Melad narrowed his eyes and thought about the information that His Majesty had just given him. He said calmly, Understood. He took 2 steps forward and looked out of the window. The army outside the window was surging like a tide. Paul's domain was roaring wildly. It was less than 150 meters away from the end of the block. Melad took a deep breath, suddenly turned around and said calmly, Attack with all your strength and destroy the heretics of Rothschild. Buzz. As he spoke, before the Holy Disarmament Corps moved, a blazing white light suddenly lit up in the rainy night outside. The light lit up from a very far distance and illuminated the night sky in an instant. Like a meteor cutting through the sky, it suddenly drew an incomparably gorgeous white line in the night. The white light cut through the night, tore through the wind and rain, and suddenly approached from a very far distance. In the blink of an eye, the sky and the earth were all filled with sword light. The sword light flew over the army of Wulon State and stabbed straight at Paul. Melad saw this sword light that was enough to amaze everyone. His eyes suddenly condensed for a moment, and then he laughed out loud. Heaven-breaking. Good ha 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 ha. Almost all the experts recognized this sword move. It was definitely a famous sword move in the Dark World. In Eastern Europe, this move was even more famous. This move. It was called heaven breaking. It was like the most obvious signal. As the sword light passed, the night sky of the entire Reki city suddenly became restless. The sword light approached Paul in the blink of an eye. Paul suddenly turned around. In his line of sight, in the extremely bright light, the only thing he could see was a slightly cracked sword edge. The sword light raged endlessly in the dark night. There was sharpness everywhere. This sword was also called sharpness. Chapter 498. There were no surprises. Everything was as many people had imagined. When the two invincible realm experts of Rothschild were about to break out of the encirclement, the first to make a move was the Dark Sword Master of Eastern Europe, Qin Shilai. It could only be Qin Shilai. Li Tianlan chose to mobilize the army of Wulan State to kill the Shadow Throne tonight. Now all the processes could be said to be extremely smooth. The dissolution of the Shadow Throne could be said to be an extremely heavy loss to the European Union and Rothschild. By doing this, Li Tianlan had formed a deadly feud with Rothschild. It was impossible for him to let Paul and King Tong leave Eastern Europe. It was not as simple as letting the tiger return to the mountain. Since he had done it tonight, he had to do it thoroughly. King Tong was doomed. Paul will die too. Otherwise, if the two of them ran away, when Li Tianlan returned to Zhongzhou State, the invincible realm experts of the Qin clan, Sai City, and even Samsara Palace would not be able to follow him all the time. At that time, Li Tianlan would not even have the ability to protect himself when facing King Tong and Paul. Tonight, the two of them would not die. Li Tianlan would die one day. All the major forces had a reason to kill Paul and King Tong. They could even do it at all costs. But only Li Tianlan killed Paul and King Tong for the sake of survival. Li Tianlan was undoubtedly the most resolute one among all the reasons given by all parties at all costs. So Qin Shilai took the lead. The sharp and bright sword light cut through the night sky. One sword to pierce the heavens. This strike was like the most obvious signal. The instant they saw this signal, all of the superpowers began to move. The darkness seemed to have been completely dispersed by the light. The heavy rain was shattered into mist by the extremely sharp sword chi. The fog rose in the light, and it was a vast expanse. The bright sword edge swept through the crowd of Wulan State, and went straight forward in the air. At this moment, the bright sword edge seemed to have pierced the whole world, and directly arrived in front of Paul with an incomparably violent penetrating force. Paul's action of turning around was extremely hasty, but his eyes were extremely calm. This sword was very powerful. No one could deny that. Qin Shilai ranked first on the holy list. But no one in the entire dark world really thought that his strength would be limited to the holy list. There was another Li Tianlan on the divine list in this realm. If Li Tianlan was replaced, Qin Shilai's name would definitely appear on the divine list. At this moment, the sword in Paul's eyes had even surpassed those at the bottom of the divine list in terms of momentum. Even if it was not as good as King Tong's, it was not far behind. But in the eyes of Paul, who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, this powerful sword strike was not perfect. This sword was called Heaven Splitter. The sword intent was extremely sharp and fierce. However, he did not have enough sword chi. This was the common problem of the Qin clan's swordsmanship, as well as the Lin clan and the Li family's swordsmanship. The Lin clan, the Qin clan, and the Li family were of the same origin. For hundreds of years, the three forces had produced masters in large numbers and were invincible. However, the sword intent of the ancestor of the Lin clan, who could compete with the Chosen One, was too arrogant. Now, after generations of inheritance, there were only a few people who could achieve a balance between sword intent and sword chi. Even the current Lin Fengting and Li Honghe in their heyday had far more sword intent than sword energy. It was just that Paul couldn't see through it with his current realm. He couldn't see through Lin Fengting's flaws. But Qin Shilai's realm was not high enough. The shortcomings of this sword strike were magnified infinitely in Paul's eyes. The majestic sword light had completely covered Qin Shilai's figure. The sharpness fell down like a meteor, leaving an extremely amazing arc. The sword light approached Paul at a high speed. The moment it approached Paul, the bright sword edge suddenly lifted up in an extremely subtle manner. In an instant, all the sword light between heaven and earth completely condensed on the tip of the sword, and turned into an extremely tiny speck. The darkness spread again. At the moment when black and white alternated, the crazily vibrating sharpness went up from the bottom, and the sword went straight to Paul's throat. Qin Shilai's expression was calm and focused. This sword strike and this battle were both at his peak state. His strength, sword intent, sword energy, speed, and willpower had all reached the best state. Paul suddenly raised his palm. A storm suddenly broke out on the silent battlefield. In the blink of an eye, the air within a radius of hundreds of meters twisted at a speed visible to the naked eye. The calm night sky was like a piece of paper that Paul had crumbled at will. The night kept shaking, twisting, and becoming extremely messy. Layers of twisted space blocked the sight of countless people. The lights, the night, the ruins, and the tall buildings in the distance all became distant and blurred in the twisted night. The night within a radius of hundreds of meters was twisting and shrinking toward Paul crazily. Paul reached out and grabbed it. His eyes were calm, but in an instant he seemed to have pulled through a piece of night. The twisted space turned into an extremely restless airflow, surging in Paul's hands. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The sharp sword edge swept across Paul's chest and went straight up. An incomparably dark vortex had appeared in Paul's hand. The vortex was dark and spinning in his palm. It was small but extremely heavy. Facing the bright sword light, Paul fiercely slapped down with his palm. In the dark vortex, the bright sword light completely exploded in the blink of an eye. Black and white crisscrossed and constantly collided in the small space. The center where the two of them stood directly raised an extremely dark shock wave. The shock wave spread in all directions. Before all the soldiers near Wulon State had time to retreat, they burst into pieces of blood mist under the vibration of the powerful force. In the center of the battle, Qin Shilai held the hilt of the sword and struggled to move forward. But Paul, who still looked calm, suddenly opened his domain. Qin Shilai's body lost balance in the void domain for a moment. Paul's palm had already pressed down, grabbing onto the sharp edge of the sword. Qin Shilai's face changed. He held the sword edge and suddenly spun. The moment his body rose into the air, he stepped hard on the ground. In the short time when the void shook, Qin Shilai, who had found the point of strength again, shook his long sword, and the man and the sword began to spin wildly. The white sword energy burst out without warning. At this moment, Qin Shilai and the famous sword sharpness seemed to have merged together, and the man and the sword became one. He was spinning. The sword was spinning. It was as if the boundless white sword light was exploding with every rotation, exploding the sky and howling in all directions. There were thousands of sword energy, like a storm. Storm style. Qin Shilai and sharpness had turned into rapidly spinning light. The sword light stabbed at Paul's chest while spinning. Paul pulled King Tong and began to retreat. His domain had shrunk to a very small size, but it was extremely solid. It became extremely difficult for the crazily spinning sword light to stab at the domain. Every time sharpness spun, there would be a large piece of sword light going up against the sky, turning into an incomparably gorgeous sword curtain. Qin Shilai spun faster and faster, as if he had turned into a nail, trying to penetrate Paul's domain. Paul raised his eyebrows. The patriarch of Rothschild, who looked extremely gentle when he broke out of the encirclement and killed in the rain of blood, suddenly became extremely majestic and fierce. There was a faint cracking sound in the air. It was the sound of the air condensing and squeezing tightly, and finally making a sonic boom. The domain in front of Paul seemed to have completely condensed into a real physical wall in an instant. The wall that blocked the rotating sword light instantly shrank by nearly 2 meters. Qin Shilai missed the target. With all his strength, his body subconsciously rushed forward. There was a flash of killing intent in Paul's eyes, and he punched hard. Buzz! In the incomparably silent buzzing sound, with Paul's punch, the domain that had condensed into a physical entity expanded wildly in an instant. The domain did not envelop Qin Shilai. Instead, it was like a wall pushing forward in the void, hitting Qin Shilai hard. The fierce collision and the sound of flesh being torn rang out. Dark red blood spilled out, which was shocking. Qin Shilai's body was directly knocked into the air. The bright sword light flickered, and only blood kept falling from the sky. Paul narrowed his eyes. Before he could take the next step, An extremely sharp and crisp sound suddenly rang out in the air. The flickering sharpness lit up again in an instant. Qin Shilai, half covered in blood, stabilized in the sky, holding the sword with both hands. Paul seemed to realize something and suddenly looked up at the sky. The infinite sword intent that had been shot out by the storm style in the sky had begun to dim and disappear. But as Qin Shilai clenched sharpness, the vast sword energy that seemed to fill the world suddenly began to surge wildly. Qin Shilai took a deep breath. In the almost endless white sword energy between heaven and earth, he clenched sharpness and chopped down hard. Roundabout style. Boom. A thunderous roar suddenly rang out in the sky and on the ground. Countless white sword energy gathered together and rushed down like a surging river. It was like a turbulent torrent, unstoppable. Paul frowned, and a serious look finally appeared between his eyebrows. The sword energy surged like a torrent, fell from the sky and flew down. There was a whistling sound of surging sword energy between heaven and earth. Paul took a step forward and opened his palm to the sword light and heaven and earth. It seemed that the torrent of sword energy that could easily swallow him roared and smashed down. Paul closed his eyes and clenched his palm. Unique skill. Shadow grip. The night was dark. The sword light, which was like a torrent, turned into a brilliant silvery white under the night sky. Between the black and white, Paul's whole body suddenly spread a gray. The gray, like a shadow, was obscure and dangerous, forming a halo in front of Paul. The halo spread out. Paul clenched his palms tightly. As a result, one halo after another was constantly formed, like ripples spreading layer by layer. The gray shadow was soundless, and it was endless. It went round and round. Wherever the shadow passed, the night turned gray. The silver-white sword energy was obliterated and turned gray at the same time. The sword energy, which was like a big river, kept breaking under the erosion of the halo. It kept shattering and disappearing. The gray halo grew larger and larger. It rushed to the sky and rushed to Qin Shilai. Paul's palm suddenly opened. The gray halo was no longer formed, but the halo that spread out suddenly condensed into a big hand. The huge gray palm phantom seemed to cover the whole world. The big hand swept across the sky and pressed down hard on Qin Shilai. Qin Shilai's eyes were red. He held the long sword tightly, and his eyes became extremely calm and determined in an instant. He had thought that Paul would be very strong. He also knew that he was no match for Paul. How could a person who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm be so easy to deal with? But he also didn't think that with his strength, which was enough to rank on the divine list, he could only make 3 moves in front of Paul. Heaven-breaking move, storm move, and roundabout style. There should be a lot more. There must be a lot more. Qin Shilai suddenly straightened up. The big gray hand gradually closed and smashed down directly. A figure suddenly appeared in front of Qin Shilai. This was an extremely slender and tall figure. He looked very young in the ranks of the invincible realm experts. There was a smile on his face, but the depths of his eyes were full of wildness and madness. He stood in front of Qin Shilai, holding an incomparably huge shield in his hand. The shield was 3 meters long, dark, and extremely thick. The moment it appeared, it directly blocked him and Qin Shilai behind it. Paul raised his eyebrows and clenched his fists again. The gray palm phantom in the air directly turned into a fist. The incomparably huge fist smashed hard on the shield. In the huge roar, the gray fist shadow dissipated in an instant. The figure holding the shield and Qin Shilai were both smashed down from the air by this punch and fell to the ground. There was a big pit with a radius of nearly 20 meters on the ground. The 2 invincible realm experts stood in the deep pit and looked at each other, their eyes full of seriousness. Paul looked at Qin Shilai quietly. After a moment of silence, he said slowly, "I didn't expect that the Qin clan in Eastern Europe would really be willing to be Li Tianlan's lackey. As the Dark Sword Master, don't you feel aggrieved? It's just normal cooperation." Qin Shilai walked out of the deep pit step by step and said blandly, "The Qin clan has its own interests. Shouldn't allies help each other?" Paul laughed. His smile was gentle and deep. "So you're going to help Li Tianlan kill me?" "Kill you?" Qin Shilai shook his head. "His Highness Li Tianlan has no malice towards you too." He paused and glanced around subconsciously. The Dark Sword Master was really an upright person. He said such words that even he did not believe himself. In the night, a red light seemed to flash across his face. His Highness Li Tianlan wants to invite you two to the office of the president as guests. How about staying in Reki City for one more night? Paul squinted at Qin Shilai. Qin Shilai's face was calm and cold, but the light in his eyes was extremely hot. Paul laughed. This invitation carries a lot of weight, he said softly. But you don't have enough weight. Your sword intent is strong, but your sword energy is weak. This is the biggest shortcoming of your kendo. Or your kendo is perfect, but unfortunately you can't do it. Now you are far from it. You haven't learned swordsmanship from Li Tianlan for a long time. Qin Shilai froze for a moment. Learn swordsmanship? From Li Tianlan? This sentence was so weird that even in this kind of scene, Qin Shilai was still a little lost in thought. Paul furrowed his brow thoughtfully. Li Honghe, Lin Fengting and Qin Shilai. The kendo of the three invincible realm experts was of the same origin. They were all swords of the Lin clan. The sword intent of the Lin clan was proud and distant. Few people could really comprehend its essence and improve their sword energy to a level that was in line with the sword energy. Among the people Paul had seen, there were only two people who used the kendo of the Lin clan as the foundation and had perfect sword intent and sword energy. The first one did not belong to either the Lin clan, the Li family, or the Qin clan. Instead, he created a new superpower. He was deity of the purgatory of heaven capital. The combination of his sword intent and sword energy was perfect, but this kind of perfection was his compromise. He gave up the final part of kendo and limited himself to a certain height. At this height, he was almost invincible. He was also at the peak of the invincible realm. In this state, deity would not be at a disadvantage even in the face of Wang Tianzong. However, because of deity's compromise, his perfection was also slightly flawed. The other one was Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's realm was not high, but his path was extremely perfect. It could be said to be the real path of the chosen one. With the 24 moves of sword as the foundation, he created a new path. On this path, his sword intent could be said to be the strongest in the whole dark world. Li Tianlan's weakness was the lack of sword energy, but his lack of sword energy was different from Qin Shilai's. It was difficult to make up for Qin Shilai's lack of sword energy. Li Tianlan's lack of sword energy was because his realm was not high enough. The only thing he needed was time. Therefore, Li Tianlan's perfection was the real perfection. Although he had not reached the invincible realm, in Paul's opinion he was fully qualified to teach Qin Shilai. Paul even thought that Qin Shilai learning swordsmanship from Li Tianlan was part of the cooperation between the two sides. And it was a very important part. But now it seemed that this was not the case. Qin Shilai fell silent, deep in thought. Paul shook his head and stopped thinking about it. His eyes fell on the tall and straight figure beside Qin Shilai. That incomparably huge, almost exaggeratedly huge shield began to slowly shrink, finally turning into a ring. Paul looked at the ring quietly and suddenly said, "The Dark Saint Spear can't be charged for long enough. It can't be fired." The Dark Saint Spear. The exclusive murderous weapon of the Dark Knights. It went without saying who the invincible realm expert who appeared here with the Dark Saint Spear in his hand was. Indeed. Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights, nodded. "But I don't need to use the Dark Saint Spear to deal with you for the time being." His words were steady and clear, with strong contempt. Paul was not angry. He just sighed softly. "I thought we could be friends," he said softly. Rothschild was the Vatican's biggest enemy in Europe. And the Vatican was the Dark Knight's biggest enemy in Europe. The enemy of the enemy was a friend. The Dark Knights and Rothschild had cooperated many times. And every time they cooperated, they were extremely happy. But it was obvious that tonight, they were on opposite sides. "Come with us, and we'll be friends." Raphael's voice was indifferent. "No." Paul shook his head without hesitation. Raphael laughed. "Then we're enemies. Just the two of you." Paul suddenly took a step forward. He opened his hands, as if he was embracing the whole world. "You can't stop me." A gray shadow suddenly bloomed between his hands. This time, the gray was extremely rich and dark, with a clear smell of death. The shadow was like fog, but it quickly spread to Raphael and Qin Shilai. A unique skill. Shadow Judgment. This move was far more difficult and powerful than the Shadow Kingdom. It could be said to be one of Paul's killer moves. The shadow surged. Paul took a deep breath and took a step forward. As soon as his foot landed, he suddenly let out a muffled groan. "Brother!" King Tong screamed all of a sudden. The shadow that had drowned Raphael and Qin Shilai suddenly began to retreat and disappeared completely in an instant. Paul's figure became a little stooped. He reached out his hand and touched the corner of his mouth. Blood was flowing down from the corner of his mouth, and it was dark red. Paul turned to look at the west. A group of figures were crossing the army of Wulon State from the west and slowly walking over. "Mellad." Paul spoke slowly, his voice cold. No one doubted their identity. Maybe some people didn't know Mellad, but no one present didn't know the uniform of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican. "How dare you interfere with me?" There was a touch of extremely cold anger in Paul's voice. Shadow Judgment was one of the most powerful unique skills of Rothschild. But just like the ice-condensed tomb, the Vatican also had unique skills of the same origin. And this Shadow Judgment was called Light Judgment in the Vatican. It was also something left behind by the Pope who was born in Rothschild. Although it lacked a lot of essence, when Paul went all out to kill Raphael and Qin Shilai in one fell swoop, Mellad's Light Judgment secretly attacked, disturbed Paul, and also caused him some injuries. Mellad glanced at him and didn't say anything. But the Holy Disarmament Corps was getting closer and closer to them. Paul suddenly turned around and looked to the south. Mitchell led the elites of the Heroes Club and slowly appeared in his sight. In the other direction, Cass Rotter, the leader of the Men in Black, and Huan Kong, the lord of the fantasy world, also appeared here. Raphael, Cass Rotter, Huan Kong, Qin Shilai, Mitchell, Mellad. The lineup was getting larger and larger. For Paul, they were all enemies. Paul fell silent and just looked at them quietly. Several Invincible Realm experts who represented the major superpowers were getting closer and closer. When their footsteps stopped, Paul slowly opened his mouth. "Do you all want to die?" Li Tianlan did not appear on the battlefield. But in front of him was the battlefield. The satellite of Wulon State had completely locked onto Reki City. Everything in Reki City appeared on the screen in front of him at this time. The scene had begun to change from chaos to clarity. With the entrance of all the Invincible Realm experts, the entire army of Wulon State had begun to retreat quietly. Li Tianlan silently calculated the strength of the two sides. Paul's absolute strength was the biggest accident in his plan. He knew that Paul was an Invincible Realm expert. In other words, Qin Weibai knew that Paul was an Invincible Realm expert. Qin Weibai's intelligence had never been wrong. This time, it was right, but the only thing wrong was Paul's strength. This could be said to be Qin Weibai's mistake, but it also caused a fatal loophole in his plan. The current scene gradually became clear. Li Tianlan was working with all the major forces to attack Rothschild. With such a huge advantage, it seemed that this fatal loophole was no longer fatal. But for some reason, Li Tianlan felt more and more uneasy. Since Qin Shilai and Raphael were punched down from the air by Paul, Li Tianlan had gotten up several times and wanted to go directly to the Caesar Hotel. Dongcheng Rushi looked at Li Tianlan, who was uneasy, and suddenly said, "If you want to go, I'll accompany you." "It's not time yet." Li Tianlan took a deep breath and shook his head. "If I go there now, the consequences will be unpredictable. We have to wait." Knock knock. There was a slight but clear knock on the door. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and asked subconsciously, "Who is it?" The high-level members of the Snowdance Corps had another task tonight. At this time, Li Tianlan couldn't think of anyone who would knock on his door. There was no response from the person outside the door. The next second, Wang Tianzong directly pushed the door open. Dongcheng Rushi glanced at him and didn't say anything. Li Tianlan wanted to turn off the screen in front of him, but after thinking about it, he put down the remote control in his hand and said calmly, "Your Majesty, what's the matter?" His voice was polite, but it was also extremely cold. "Watching the show," Wang Tianzong said blandly. "Sure enough, only you can see the scene. I don't even have the right to have a look, so I came." He glanced at Li Tianlan and said slowly, Can't I? Li Tianlan's eyes flashed. He was silent for a few seconds, and then he suddenly smiled and said, Of course you can. Rushi, make tea for your majesty. Thank you. After saying that, Wang Tianzong walked straight over and sat next to Li Tianlan. The confrontation on the screen was depressing and heavy. Wang Tianzong watched quietly for a while and suddenly said, The situation in Rothschild is not optimistic. It's not necessarily pessimistic, is it? Li Tianlan smiled, and his smile was a little cold. Your Majesty treats them as friends, but they may not treat you as a friend. At least Paul didn't tell you everything, such as the relationship between him and the Patriarch of the Eastern Church, and his cooperation with the Violet family and the Morton family. Obviously, you don't know any of these. Otherwise, how could you lose your cool and come to my place to watch the show? Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows in surprise and glanced at Li Tianlan. Do you know that they cooperate with the Eastern Church? Hearing his tone, Li Tianlan frowned slightly and said, Do you also know? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while, and then he said blandly, My relationship with Paul is not good. King Tong is my friend. Li Tianlan replied with an expressionless face. I'm here to inform you of something. Wang Tianzong took out a cigarette, lit it and said slowly, It doesn't matter what happens in Reki City tonight. If you miss me, you can stay here, and I can stay here too. But I don't care what the final solution is. Paul needs to live, and so does King Tong. That's my bottom line. He paused and continued, Tianlan, you've touched my bottom line. Do you think I dare to touch your bottom line? Do I dare to kill you? Li Tianlan glanced at him and said expressionlessly, Your Majesty, you worry too much. He said expressionlessly, Your Majesty is worrying too much. I have no ill intentions towards the two princes of Rothschild, so I will not kill them. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan said that he would not kill King Tong and Paul. But he did not say that King Tong and Paul would definitely be alive. He would not kill them. Other forces would naturally take action. Wang Tianzong glanced at the major forces confronting each other on the screen, and did not speak for a long time. Chapter 499. Li Tianlan's eyes turned between the silent Wang Tianzong and the silent screen, and he did not speak. Wang Tianzong's meaning was very simple. In desperation, he did not care much about the strength of the Shadow Throne. Only the life and death of King Tong and Paul were his bottom line. Li Tianlan was thoughtful. With Wang Tianzong's current status, even if he was in a mess now, he would not intimidate him. He said that was the bottom line. That was the bottom line. And Li Tianlan believed that Wang Tianzong did not just say this to him. At this moment, even Zhongzhou State knew this sentence. It was like a threat, but also like a deal. Wang Tianzong could be imprisoned here because he obeyed the rules and did not want to touch the bottom line of the entire Zhongzhou State. So what he meant by this sentence was that he did not want Zhongzhou State and Li Tianlan to touch his bottom line. This completely showed that the relationship between the Wang family of Beihai and Rothschild was far deeper than what everyone saw. Otherwise, Wang Tianzong would not have done such a thing to threaten Zhongzhou State. This sentence undoubtedly put Li Tianlan in a difficult position. The situation tonight was completely dominated by Li Tianlan, and he had no choice but to advance. If Paul and King Tong did not die, Li Tianlan would die. But now Wang Tianzong stood here with a calm face. If Paul and King Tong died, Li Tianlan would also die. Li Tianlan could only throw the problem back to Wang Tianzong. He could not kill Paul and King Tong. He could also not kill the Dark Knights and the Qing clan. But if the Vatican killed them, if the Heroes Club killed them, or if the fantasy world and the Men in Black killed them, would Wang Tianzong put the blame on Li Tianlan? This sounded unreasonable, but the problem was that Li Tianlan really did not know the answer. When Wang Tianzong made his bottom line clear, other forces killed Paul and King Tong. If Wang Tianzong took action, Li Tianlan and he would both suffer losses. But after weighing the pros and cons, Li Tianlan was still more seriously injured. Because Wang Tianzong would directly kill him. He might be held accountable by the furious Zhongzhou State afterward, and the Wang family of Beihai might pay a high price. But when he made his bottom line clear, Li Tianlan touched his bottom line first. So in the essence of this matter, Who on earth violated the rules of the game first? Li Tianlan looked at the screen quietly and said nothing. He was waiting for Wang Tianzong's answer. That fear and nervousness began to rise from his heart once again, spiraling continuously and finally occupying his senses. Wang Tianzong was motionless. But in Li Tianlan's mind, Wang Tianzong was a storm that could easily swallow him, and even the entire office of the president. This storm was very gentle, but it was extremely oppressive and biting cold. After a long time, Wang Tianzong slowly withdrew his gaze from the screen. He glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at him. Both of them looked at each other calmly. "I'm done," Wang Tianzong said. "I don't want to watch this play." He slowly turned around and left Li Tianlan's room. Li Tianlan sat still, but for the first time, his face became extremely gloomy. He said that he would not kill Paul and King Tong. But he didn't say that others wouldn't kill them. It was impossible for Wang Tianzong not to know such an obvious word. Li Tianlan just wanted to test Wang Tianzong's attitude. If someone else killed King Tong and Paul, what would he do? But Wang Tianzong's attitude was that he had no attitude. He didn't take Li Tianlan's word game to heart at all. He walked into the room, said his bottom line and then left. He wasn't here to negotiate. All of this was like an order or a notice. Wang Tianzong didn't care about the Shadow Throne. He didn't even care about Li Tianlan, who imprisoned him here. What he cared about were the rules. And within the current rules he would not leave the office of the president, nor would he allow King Tong and Paul to die. That was all. Li Tianlan's face was livid. Wang Tianzong's every move made him feel the arrogance. His notice was so clear and straightforward. What Li Tianlan felt from it was only the other party's contempt. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and managed to ease his expression. He took out a cigarette and lit it. He bit the cigarette but hard and looked at King Tong and Paul on the screen in a daze. Wang Tianzong didn't answer his question. So Li Tianlan didn't know how he would react if someone else killed King Tong and Paul. He wasn't sure if he didn't know. It was because of his uncertainty that Li Tianlan suddenly felt extremely great pressure and scruples. "Let's just kill him." A clear and calm voice suddenly rang out. A pair of white and tender little hands appeared on Li Tianlan's shoulder. Dongqing Rushi gently kneaded Li Tianlan's shoulder with a peaceful face. Li Tianlan's tense body slowly relaxed under Dongqing Rushi's kneading. He leaned on the sofa tiredly, shook his head, and said with a wry smile, "How?" "I have silence," Dongqing Rushi said. Her martial arts seemed to belong to Jade Pool. But if it was divided in detail, silence, the famous sword of Jade Pool, was her real path. Her practice was simple and pure. She practiced the sword intent left in the silence sword by the previous generations of invincible sword masters of Jade Pool. She was the same age as Li Tianlan. They were born on the same day in the same month of the same year. Dongqing Rushi, who was 22 years old, was now almost close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, as if she would break through at any time. If she could completely integrate the sword intent in the silence sword tonight, she could go straight to the invincible realm overnight. Of course, Dongqing Rushi couldn't do this. But now, she held the famed sword silence in her hand. The instant the blade was unsheathed, it was a truly invincible strike. Even if the power of this sword could not reach the peak of the invincible realm, once the majestic sword intent in the silence sword burst out, it would be comparable to the power of an expert in the middle of the divine list. In a sense, the special martial arts that Dongqing Rushi practiced limited the upper limit of her achievements, but it also made her a very special one. Dongqing Rushi held the famous sword silently. It was equivalent to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, with a murderous weapon. This was enough to make an invincible realm expert retreat. However, the murderous weapon consumed energy. Silence, on the other hand, consumed life force. No. Li Tianlan shook his head without hesitation. After a pause he said again, "Not enough." He couldn't let Dongqing Rushi pull out the sword. Dongqing Rushi's current realm was still a little low, but the sword intent of more than one silent sword master was left in the silent sword. Several kinds of sword intents came from silence at the same time. They didn't seem to be much different, but the subtle changes were extremely complicated. Dongqing Rushi wanted to use her own sword intent to barely control the sword energy and sword intent in the silent sword. Only when she reached the half-step invincible realm, and was infinitely close to the invincible realm, could she be seriously injured and not die after pulling out the sword. As for now, Dongqing Rushi barely pulled out the sword, and the possibility of survival was less than 10%. It was a situation of survival. And what could Dongqing Rushi do after pulling out the sword? The silent sword was an invincible realm expert. Li Tianlan himself was an invincible realm expert. Even if Qin Shilai and Raphael were here, plus Situtsangyue and Tribulation in Sai City, the six of them together would not be a match for Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong didn't even need to pull out the sword, including the master of Samsara Palace and Lin Fengting. These were the 8 invincible realm experts. Only when Lin Fengting, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, could Li Tianlan feel that there was a chance. Of course, there was a more secure lineup. If Deity of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was added, or Deity could replace Dongqing Rushi, only then would Li Tianlan really want to give it a try. And all of this was without considering the rules. Even if Li Tianlan could really gather everyone, and even pull Deity over, Wang Tianzong was the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State after all. How could he attack Wang Tianzong? Li Tianlan silently thought about his own lineup and Wang Tianzong's current realm. His heart suddenly became more depressed. Dongqing Rushi noticed his mood, and her movements became more and more gentle. There's one thing you have to remember. Li Tianlan stood up and looked at Dongqing Rushi. On this trip to Eastern Europe, you are not allowed to pull out the sword. You can't even have this kind of thought. Do you understand? Dongqing Rushi let out an ah, and looked at Li Tianlan in a daze. She looked silly. Don't play dumb with me. In such a serious situation, Li Tianlan still couldn't help laughing. He reached out and pinched Dongqing Rushi's soft face. He said with a smile, "If you dare to be disobedient, I don't want you anymore." He got up and walked out of the door. "Where are you going?" Dongqing Rushi suddenly asked. Li Tianlan paused and chuckled. "I just asked His Majesty the Sword Emperor a question, but he didn't answer me, so I can only go and ask again." He pushed the door open and walked out. Wang Tianzong's residence was next door, separated from Li Tianlan's residence by a courtyard. Passing by the garden in the courtyard, Li Tianlan stood in front of Wang Tianzong's door and stopped. He asked the question once, and now he asked it again. This was really a little embarrassing. However, Li Tianlan's face was still calm. He reached out and was about to knock on the door. "Come in." Wang Tianzong's voice sounded in the room. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and walked in. Wang Tianzong sat on the sofa in the living room, with a pot of tea on the tea table in front of him. Hearing Li Tianlan come in and close the door, Wang Tianzong did not look back, but asked calmly, "What's the matter?" "Yes." Li Tianlan sat opposite him, reached out to take the teapot, and poured himself a cup of tea. "Go ahead." Wang Tianzong's tone was light. Li Tianlan thought for a while, and he did not ask this question in any way without losing face. It was a little embarrassing to ask this question again. So Li Tianlan came straight to the point. "I won't kill King Tong and Paul." He looked into Wang Tianzong's eyes and said sincerely, "But if someone else kills them, will you kill me, Your Majesty?" Wang Tianzong froze and looked up at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at him, and his eyes became more and more sincere. Wang Tianzong finally laughed. He seemed to find the current scene very interesting. "Are you afraid?" "Yes." Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong's smile and laughed himself. "I'm scared to death." The picture on the screen kept changing. Dongqing Rushi, who stayed alone in the room, looked at the picture that was enough to make anyone in the dark world extremely nervous. She was in a daze. Li Tianlan had been gone for nearly 20 minutes. Dongqing Rushi thought for a moment, stood up, and made a cup of strong tea for Li Tianlan. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. Li Tianlan didn't sleep, so she didn't want to sleep either. So she found some snacks and put them on the coffee table. The picture on the screen changed silently. Dongqing Rushi took a handful of melon seeds and stared at the screen with wide eyes. as if she was watching a modern war fantasy drama. The door was pushed open from the outside. Dongqing Rushi stood up subconsciously, grabbed a handful of melon seeds, and whispered, "You're back." Eh. Her voice suddenly disappeared, and her delicate eyebrows frowned slightly, as if she was recalling something. A middle-aged man she had never seen before came in from outside the door, but she was very familiar with him. The man's appearance was ordinary, but his face was very clean. He was dressed in a black casual suit that seemed to be everywhere. His expression was gentle, and he walked in slowly. His ordinary appearance didn't make Dongqing Rushi feel any aura. But Dongqing Rushi's body tensed up reflexively. This man was too simple. He was so simple that he became real. With his appearance, everything in the room seemed to become fake. Only he was real. The most real person. The simplest person. Dongqing Rushi didn't say anything, nor did she warn him. She just stared at the man who was very familiar, but also very strange. The middle-aged man didn't seem to expect to see Dongqing Rushi in Li Tianlan's room. A touch of anger and complexity flashed through his eyes, and he whispered, "You live together?" "You are?" Dongqing Rushi looked at him and asked in a daze. The man frowned quickly, and then smiled. He asked in a gentle voice, "You really don't know me?" Dongqing Rushi's countless memories kept changing, and finally stopped in a certain picture. It was a few days before the final battle in Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago, when he and several other young people from East Emperor Palace were besieged by a prince of East Island. Dongqing Rushi also wanted to draw her sword in desperation. However, that sword was forcefully pushed back by someone. The most obvious thing in Dongqing Rushi's memory was the man's eyes. They were clean, clear, simple, gentle, and kind. "You," he hesitated for a moment. "You saved me in East Island more than 3 years ago." "I'm not a bad person," the middle-aged man said softly, and a touch of disappointment flashed through his eyes. Of course, that was not what he wanted to ask. He asked Dongqing Rushi if she really didn't know him, and he wasn't asking Dongqing Rushi. He was asking another personality in Dongqing Rushi's body that had been silent for a long time. "How did you get in?" Dongqing Rushi was a little curious. The man was undoubtedly a strong man. But the defense in the office of the president could not be explained by a strong man. The reason why Wang Tianzong was imprisoned here, in addition to abiding by the rules, was that he couldn't leave here quietly without being discovered by the Snowdance Corps. In other words, Wang Tianzong couldn't get out, and the people outside couldn't come in quietly, unless the other party was stronger than Wang Tianzong. In this way, there was only one possibility. You have people in the Snowdance Corps? There seemed to be a sharp light in Dongqing Rushi's eyes. "Who the hell are you?" "Purgatory of Heaven Capital." The middle-aged man smiled. "Deity." Dongqing Rushi's eyes were still clear, but the look in them suddenly became extremely vigilant. "Don't be nervous. After all, I saved you. You know I mean no harm, right?" Deity looked at Dongqing Rushi, and his eyes were a little dazed. Dongqing Rushi was silent for a while, and then she asked softly, "What brings you here?" Of course, Deity had something to do, but he didn't talk to Dongqing Rushi, but to Li Tianlan. However, as he walked into the office of the president, he suddenly found a very important problem that even made him a little uneasy. This problem became something new. He looked into Dongqing Rushi's eyes and said softly, "Little girl, can you tell me where the high-level members of the Snowdance Corps went tonight?" Dongqing Rushi froze for a moment, and looked at the screen subconsciously. Only then did she find that from the outbreak of the war in the Caesar Hotel to the present, the high-level members of the Snowdance Corps had not appeared on the battlefield even once. Not a single high-level member had appeared. Where did they all go? Dongqing Rushi was silent for a while, and suddenly said seriously, "They went to eat." Zhongzhou State. Hidden Dragon Sea. Jinqiu Pavilion. When the Invincible Realm battlefield in Reki City completely began, it was already the afternoon of August 18th in Yuzhou. The atmosphere in Jinqiu Pavilion was solemn. The satellite of Zhongzhou State had connected to the signal of Wulan State. On the screen in the study of Jinqiu Pavilion, the battlefield in front of the Caesar Hotel in Reki City was playing. The picture was slightly delayed, but it did not affect President Li Huaqing's analysis of the situation. This man, who could be said to be the most powerful in Zhongzhou state, frowned and stared at the screen. Suddenly he said, "Is all this Tianlan's plan?" "Yes." Beside Li Huaqing, Dongqing Wudi, who was in military uniform, nodded with a calm expression. "The plan is too big and too urgent." Li Huaqing frowned tightly. "In the war, it's a big taboo to advance rashly. Since Eastern Europe has become chaotic, how can it be restored overnight? What Tianlan should do now is to defend Reki City and slowly digest the results. It's not surprising that such a big scene will drag on for 2 or 3 years. Why is he in such a hurry?" Dongqing Wudi did not speak. The chaos in Eastern Europe involved so much that it had affected the entire dark world. Li Huaqing was right. In such a situation, it was not surprising that it would drag on for 2 or 3 years. But the problem was that everything was ready in Tiannan. Li Tianlan could not afford to delay. Moreover, Qin Weibai had prepared for so long. Qin Weibai could not afford to delay either. 2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 months were a little too long. The intelligence of the Samsara Palace is still very accurate. Since Tianlan dares to use the intelligence of the Samsara Palace to make a layout, he must have some confidence. Let's just wait and see. Wait and see. Li Huaqing shook his head silently. You should know Tianlan's character. He has just started, unlike us. Now he will not leave himself any leeway at all. If there is a chance, he will put all his strength on it at once. What he believes is that a lion fights a rabbit. This style is naturally crazy enough, and many things can be solved swiftly and decisively. But leaving no leeway is a big taboo after all. This means that he can't make any mistakes in any link. Otherwise, it will be either a big victory or a big defeat. The plan tonight is too big, and involves too many things. Who can be sure that there are no mistakes in Tianlan's plan? I don't think he can be sure himself. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while. Even if he trusted Qin Weibai very much, he could not believe that Qin Weibai's intelligence would not be wrong. Any mistake in the intelligence provided by Qin Weibai could be very fatal to Li Tianlan's plan. Things have come to this, Dongqing Wudi said slowly. I can only hope that everything goes well. Li Huaqing was silent for a long time, then shook his head with a bitter smile. I hope so. The light in the study suddenly jumped. The picture on the screen began to change. An extremely elegant and graceful figure appeared on the screen. The woman's face had completely defeated the years. She wore no makeup, but she was indescribably dignified and beautiful. She was smiling. Facing the 2 most powerful bigwigs in the chaos of Zhongzhou state, she was not nervous at all. She just smiled softly and said, Mr. President Minister, long time no see. Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi looked at each other, and saw confusion in each other's eyes. This woman was very familiar. But maybe it was because they had seen her so few times that they couldn't remember where they had seen her for a while. Tianzong asked me to pass on a message to you too. He hopes that you can communicate with Marshal Li. The woman's voice became softer and softer, like a spring breeze. Summer solstice. Li Huaqing finally reacted and subconsciously raised his voice. Summer solstice smiled and bowed slightly. I will arrive in Yuzhou within 3 hours. Li Huaqing frowned and did not speak. Mrs. Wang just said that Tianzong asked you to pass on a message? What is it? Dongqing Wudi, who had been silent, suddenly asked. Tianzong asked me to tell you that he doesn't care about the Shadow Throne. But King Tong and Paul want to live. They must live. That's his bottom line. Marshal Li seems to have some misunderstanding about Rothschild, so Tianzong hopes that you can communicate with Tianlan. Rothschild is the most important ally of the Wang family of Beihai, and has a lot of deep cooperation with Zhongzhou state. This is not a partner that we can easily give up. It's the bottom line, the real bottom line. Li Huaqing looked calm. However, Dongqing Wudi's face changed. The bottom line was the bottom line because it was something that could not be touched no matter what. He subconsciously glanced at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing was still looking at summer solstice, and his eyes were a little wandering. Dongqing Wudi's heart sank slightly and he sighed secretly. After I arrive in Yuzhou, I will go directly to the Hidden Dragon Sea. We can talk about the details face to face then. Summer solstice said with a smile. The corners of Dongqing Wudi's mouth twitched, and he said with a smile, "Of course, madam is welcome." The video call ended. Li Huaqing was silent for a long time. Dongqing Wudi opened his mouth several times and finally snorted. Summer solstice is at the peak of the invincible realm, right? Li Huaqing looked at Dongqing Wudi and said slowly, "This is their bottom line." Dongqing Wudi's face suddenly became extremely ugly. He nodded reluctantly, took out his mobile phone and said, "I'll call Tianlan now." Li Tianlan talked with Wang Tianzong for half an hour. As soon as he left Wang Tianzong's room, his mobile phone rang. Li Tianlan looked at his mobile phone and was a little surprised, but he still picked it up at once. "Minister, this is Li Tianlan," he said in a calm voice. When he said the first word, his expression had become completely calm. No one could see the result of the negotiation with Wang Tianzong from his expression. "Tianlan, I have a message here." Dongqing Wudi hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice. Li Tianlan asked directly, "What message?" "Summer solstice." Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and said, "The hostess of the Wang family of Beihai just video called me and the president." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked back at Wang Tianzong's residence. He didn't say anything and listened quietly. Dongqing Wudi gritted his teeth. There were some things that were really not suitable for him to say with his identity. Not to mention the impact. It was a little hard to say. He glanced at Li Huaqing again and finally sighed. He said with a bitter smile, "The Wang family of Beihai asked us to keep Paul and King Tong alive. This is their bottom line." Li Tianlan listened quietly. Dongqing Wudi also fell silent. "How did you reply?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. "It doesn't matter," Dongqing Wudi said calmly. "The most important thing is that Summer Solstice seems to be a little worried, so now she is on her way to Yuzhou. Within 3 hours, she will enter the Hidden Dragon Sea. The president and I can't stop her from entering the Hidden Dragon Sea." Dongqing Wudi deliberately emphasized the word president. Li Tianlan frowned slightly. Dongqing Wudi continued to remind him, "Summer solstice is also at the peak of the invincible realm." Li Tianlan completely understood what Dongqing Wudi meant. He suddenly felt a little ridiculous. How dare they? Don't you understand? It's not a matter of whether they dare or not. Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly. Li Tianlan was silent. Indeed, there were some things that were not a matter of whether the Wang family of Beihai dared or not. It was a matter of whether some people dared to bear it. For example, President Li Huaqing. Now the academics and the giant group were in the honeymoon period of cooperation. But cooperation was only cooperation after all. It was for the expected benefits and some risks now. But once the risks of such cooperation were greater than the future benefits, it was conceivable how fragile such cooperation was. If Li Tianlan didn't listen to the advice and touched the bottom line of the Wang family of Beihai, who dared to put an expert at the peak of the invincible realm of the Wang family of Beihai by his side. "I see." Li Tianlan gritted his teeth, and his voice was a little cold. Dongqing Wudi sighed and hung up the phone. Li Tianlan stood where he was for a long time without moving. Only by standing in his current position could he truly understand how unbearable it was to be forced to compromise in the face of the general trend. This was the first time he had compromised. He had to compromise. If he insisted on killing King Tong and Paul, not to mention what the Wang family of Beihai would do, Li Huaqing would call him in person in the next moment and order him to keep Paul and King Tong alive. If things developed to this point, there would be a very obvious crack between the academics and the special exhibition group. This was not good for either side. But in contrast, Li Huaqing absolutely did not dare to let Summer Solstice stay in the Hidden Dragon Sea when he touched the bottom line of the Wang family of Beihai. This was the real threat. Chapter 500. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, as if he wanted to suppress all the depression in his heart. Before he grew up, he knew that the Wang family of Beihai was very strong, but he didn't know how strong it was. When he was so weak that he couldn't even touch the edge of the Wang family of Beihai. The whole Wang family of Beihai was like a vast sky. If he didn't go up to the sky, he naturally didn't know how high the sky was. Now he was the peak of the invincible realm in the dark world, Marshal Li, or His Highness that everyone talked about, and the youngest marshal in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state. This time, he led the Snowdance Corps north to Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan's position could be said to be really high and powerful. He had seen part of the real strength of the Wang family of Beihai, and was barely qualified to compete with it. It seemed that it was not until this moment that Li Tianlan truly realized the strength of the Wang family of Beihai. In the chaos, every step he took he felt extremely strong pressure. The Wang family of Beihai just blocked his way casually, which made every step difficult for him. On the date of death, facing King Tong, Li Tianlan could not shoot. In the end, he temporarily held the leadership of Wulan state, and even successfully imprisoned Wang Tianzong here tonight. But that was only 2 steps forward on the long road. The Wang family of Beihai just took 2 steps back casually. But as the situation became more and more chaotic, when Li Tianlan really threatened the core interests of the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Tianzong showed his bottom line. Then summer solstice went to Yuzhou. Li Tianlan had to kill Paul and King Tong. This was an inevitable move. But he had already taken this step. Just as his foot was about to land, he was suppressed by the Wang family of Beihai and retreated again. At this moment, there was really no word to describe Li Tianlan's resentful and helpless mood. He didn't want to retreat, he didn't dare to retreat, but he had no choice but to retreat. Wang Tianzong could face anyone fearlessly, because he was the Sword Emperor. He relied on the Wang family of Beihai, and the Wang family of Beihai also relied on him. They were one and shared honor and disgrace. But Li Tianlan did not grow to this stage. He could face Wang Tianzong directly because of his identity at this time. To put it bluntly, it was because of the support of the giant group and the academics. The Wang family of Beihai showed its bottom line. Summer Solstice, who had never left the Wang family of Beihai for more than 20 years, came to Yuzhou in person. All this would not make the giant group change its position, but it was enough to make the academics and even Li Huaqing hesitate. If King Tong and Paul died, of course Summer Solstice would not dare to kill Li Huaqing. But that was not the point. Most importantly, Li Huaqing didn't know if the academy was willing to take on this risk. Dongqing Wudi's phone call had already explained everything. When Summer Solstice came to Yuzhou, if the academics could still stand firmly with the giant group, Dongqing Wudi would not have made this call. This phone call was made by Dongqing Wudi, but it was Li Huaqing's idea to implement it. If Li Huaqing did not support Li Tianlan could not kill King Tong and Paul. There had never been too many neutral stances in politics, especially during sensitive times. Once Li Tianlan couldn't get Li Huaqing's support, it meant that the Wang family of Beihai would get Li Huaqing's support. In such a situation, all of Li Tianlan's actions were not games but courting death. The cold night rain in Reki City fell wildly. Li Tianlan stood in the rain and smoked several cigarettes quietly before he calmed down again. The door of Wang Tianzong's room suddenly opened. Wang Tianzong stood at the door of the room and looked at Li Tianlan in the rain for a while. Suddenly he said, "Can't figure it out." "How could it be?" Li Tianlan laughed. He looked at Wang Tianzong through the rain. The light in the room shrouded him, and there was a halo in the rain. Wang Tianzong's figure seemed a little blurred. Li Tianlan wiped his face and said calmly, "When I was very young, my grandfather told me that no one in the world can sing all the way. The Wang family of Beihai has such a deep foundation. As strong as you are, haven't you also compromised? I'm just a chess piece trying to climb out of the chessboard. The general trend is now in my hands, but not everything in the world is under my control. It's not necessarily a bad thing to take a step back." Wang Tianzong didn't speak. He looked at Li Tianlan with undisguised appreciation in his eyes. Li Tianlan slowly turned around and said flatly, "Good night, Your Majesty." He walked slowly to his courtyard. "Do you like Yuetong?" Wang Tianzong's voice suddenly sounded behind him, clear and steady. Li Tianlan's footsteps suddenly stopped. After coming to Eastern Europe, Wang Yuetong had never contacted him. But from the call with Li Beitian and Ning Qiancheng, Li Tianlan knew that Wang Yuetong had followed them to Tiannan. The little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, who dared to love and hate, had gradually changed. The former liveliness had begun to disappear from her. She began to meditate for a long time, and began to focus on studying the various situations in Tiannan. She began to become more and more silent. She had never contacted Li Tianlan, or the Wang family of Beihai. If Li Tianlan could know this, how could Wang Tianzong not know? After a moment of silence, he asked in a cold tone, "What do you mean?" "Nothing." Wang Tianzong laughed. Maybe it was because the rain curtain was too wild and fierce, or maybe it was because the light was too warm, but his smile looked unprecedentedly gentle. "Don't get me wrong. No matter how despicable I am, I won't threaten you with my daughter." Li Tianlan was silent for a while and thought of Wang Yuetong, who had left Mount Dibbing and come to his side. His imagination was really poor, so he couldn't imagine what Wang Yuetong should have looked like when she left Mount Dibbing. "She didn't give up on you. She just gave up the grievances between the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family," Li Tianlan suddenly said. "I know." Wang Tianzong nodded and said lightly, "I'm just a little tired. After the things in Eastern Europe are over, I plan to take my wife to travel. She went to a lot of places when she was young, including Switzerland, England, France, the north and south of Zhengzhou state, but she didn't go to many places. For so many years, she has never left Beihai, and even rarely left Mount Dibbing. In fact, I know that she still wants to go back and see some of the scenery in the past. Look at the beauty she has seen before. Look at the amazement she has never seen before." Wang Tianzong's voice was getting lower and lower, until it was inaudible. His eyes were obviously in a trance. Looking at the rain, no one knew what he was thinking. Li Tianlan listened in silence, not understanding what Wang Tianzong meant. "What do you think?" Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. "Very good." Li Tianlan nodded. "It's quite enviable." If possible, he also wanted to take Qin Weibai, Wang Yuetong, and Dongqing Rushi to travel around the world, to see many sceneries he had never seen, to eat many delicacies he had never tasted, and to try how unrestrained the mortal world was without swords and sabers. But there were some things that he could not give up after all, at least not now. "After I leave, what do you think will happen to the Wang family of Beihai?" Wang Tianzong continued to ask. Li Tianlan was stunned and said through the rain, "I don't understand what you mean." "I'm leaving. The Wang family of Beihai needs a new patriarch. Who do you think is the most suitable?" Wang Tianzong continued to ask. Li Tianlan frowned. He really didn't feel that his identity and position were qualified to participate in such a sensitive matter. So he shook his head and said bluntly, "I don't know." Wang Tianzong nodded and suddenly said, "How about Yuetong?" Li Tianlan suddenly looked up at Wang Tianzong's eyes. Wang Tianzong's eyes were deep and peaceful, looking very sincere. "I can repeat the question I mentioned before," Wang Tianzong said quietly. "After the chaos in Eastern Europe is over, I will leave Zhengzhou state and Beihai with my wife. The position of patriarch will be handed over to Yuetong. If you are worried, I can go to the stage of formidable person and swear to the ancestors on the stone of formidable person that as long as the Wang family of Beihai is not in a crisis of life and death, I will never set foot on Mount Dibbing." His voice was clear and calm. Obviously, it was a decision made after careful consideration. "You come to the Wang family of Beihai and assist Yuetong with Shengshao. You can also use the resources of the Southeast Group to rebuild the Li family. Your first child with Yuetong can be surnamed Li. If you want him to be surnamed Wang, he can be the next heir of the Wang family of Beihai." Wang Tianzong's voice was calm and indifferent, but in Li Tianlan's ears, every word was like thunder, making him dizzy. Of course, he knew about the stage of formidable person of the Wang family of Beihai, and the stone of formidable person on the stage of formidable person. That was the most sacred place of the Wang family of Beihai. It was a holy land that the successive patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai attached great importance to. If Wang Tianzong was willing to take an oath on the stage of formidable person, he would never break his oath. Li Tianlan couldn't imagine what kind of future he would have after such a thing happened. He really couldn't imagine it. "I'm not giving the Wang family of Beihai to you. It's just that Yuetong should have her own responsibilities. Now she is obedient to you because the Wang family of Beihai has me and Shengshao. With her temperament, If she really becomes the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, you can't influence her decision. With Sheng Xiao, Yuetong will not be your puppet. So I'm very relieved. And I really think that such a Wang family of Beihai will be the most powerful in the future, unprecedentedly powerful. Wang Tianzong said calmly. Li Tianlan believed this sentence. If he didn't believe this sentence, he didn't believe in himself. Once he joined the Wang family of Beihai, the Wang family of Beihai would have a heavenly son, who could stand shoulder to shoulder with the ancestors of the Wang family of Beihai in the future. In addition, the Wang family of Beihai had Wang Shengxiao, Di Jiang, and many young experts. With such a lineup, 10 years later, the Wang family of Beihai would once again reach the most glorious peak. 20 years ago, it could completely sweep the dark world, make thousands of enemies bleed, and make heroes bow down. If that day really came, where would he be? Li Tianlan was in a trance, and then came to his senses. Why? He asked slowly. The future envisioned by Wang Tianzong was very likely to come true. But no matter how likely it was not reality after all. The reality was that the current Sword Emperor was invincible in the world. If Wang Tianzong took an oath, there would be no Sword Emperor in the dark world. Because I suddenly understood that the current Wang family of Beihai doesn't need the Sword Emperor. Wang Tianzong whispered. It's the future. You can think about it, he said slowly. As long as you nod, everything tonight will be completely reversed. You and I will be invincible in the world. King Tong, Paul, Violet, Morton, the Qin clan in Eastern Europe, and Rekvia. The four major families in Eastern Europe, Rothschild, the Wang family of Beihai, the Dark Knights, Samsara Palace, Sai City, the Giant Group, the academics, and all the forces will completely stand by your side. This force can allow you to sweep the dark world tonight. I will personally kill all the invincible realm experts who can threaten your growth in the future. Li Tianlan's heart beat wildly. The wildfire in his heart was burning, unprecedentedly crazy and blazing. Wang Tianzong's meaning was obvious. The chaos in Eastern Europe would end. And it could end tonight. As long as he agreed to Wang Tianzong's invitation, he would immediately gather an extremely powerful force around him, which could even allow him to sweep away all the superpowers. The four major families in Eastern Europe would merge into a whole again, and the chaos would disappear. Wang Tianzong would personally kill the invincible realm experts of various superpowers. Maybe before tomorrow morning, Li Tianlan would become the master of Eastern Europe. He would become the most powerful person in the entire dark world. It was all complicated, but it was also very simple. It was so simple that he only needed a nod. You still have time to think about it, Wang Tianzong said calmly. But there won't be too much time. Tianlan is still young. He still has a lot of time. A clear and cold voice rang out. Amidst the heavy rain, there was a faint, natural fragrance. Li Tianlan's body shook violently, and he suddenly turned his head. In the heavy rain, a faint white figure appeared. She was graceful and picturesque. This kind of beauty was so dreamy and so perfect. She came over with an umbrella and covered Li Tianlan's head with it. She said softly, "Why are you getting wet here? You're so silly." Li Tianlan smiled. He was really a little silly. "How did you get here?" Li Tianlan subconsciously reached out and put his arms around her slender waist. "I called Rushi, and then she picked me up." Qin Weibai rubbed her face in Li Tianlan's arms. Li Tianlan raised his head subconsciously. Sure enough, not far away, Dongqing Rushi was also standing there with an umbrella. She looked at Li Tianlan with her cheeks slightly puffed up, as if she had been wronged. Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed and subconsciously let go of Qin Weibai, but he felt something was wrong. Before he could do anything, Qin Weibai suddenly put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck. The goddess was absolutely proud of her height of 1.76 meters barefoot. She was taller than Li Tianlan in high heels, so she did not stand on tiptoe. Instead, she lowered her head and took a bite on Li Tianlan's mouth. She whispered with a smile, "I missed you so much." Her lips moved and she suddenly said, "What tea did you drink just now?" Li Tianlan frowned and suddenly turned to look at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong stood in front of the door, and his expression returned to calmness. "Don't drink this kind of tea in the future." It will distract you. Qin Weibai continued. Li Tianlan nodded and took a deep look at Wang Tianzong. What I said just now still stands, Wang Tianzong said in a flat tone. Li Tianlan thought about it carefully, and suddenly felt that the conversation between them just now became a little vague. He frowned, a little vigilant, and even a little incredulous. Did you hypnotize me? His will was really perfect now. In theory, even if the Pope of the Vatican faced him in person, he should have the ability to protect himself. Who can hypnotize you in your current mental state? Wang Tianzong asked. No matter how good his mental state is, there are flaws. Tianlan was almost fooled just because His Majesty mentioned the people and things he cared about. Qin Weibai said calmly. I didn't lie to him, so it's not fooled. Wang Tianzong shook his head. I was just inviting him. An invitation can give people a choice. Qin Weibai looked at Wang Tianzong. His Majesty used such a means to make Tianlan agree. After tonight, everything is settled. When Tianlan wakes up completely, what choice does he have except to enter the Wang family of Beihai to assist Yuetong? Isn't that good? Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. Of course not. Qin Weibai said tit for tat. We are all Tianlan's women. When it comes to assisting, it should be us assisting him. If my man stands in someone else's position to help another woman, I will be jealous. Wang Tianzong suddenly glanced at Dongqing Rushi and said meaningfully, will you really be jealous? Qin Weibai was in a trance, and her face changed slightly. Wang Tianzong laughed. You don't understand. Qin Weibai was silent for a while, and then said slowly. Wang Tianzong stopped talking, just glanced at Li Tianlan and said slowly, you can come to me when you think about it. Li Tianlan didn't say anything. Qin Weibai tidied Li Tianlan's collar and said softly, silly husband, some women are very proud. I am like this, and so is Yuetong. If you enter the Wang family of Beihai, in Yuetong's eyes, you are working for another woman. Even if I can accept it, how can Yuetong, who is proud, stand it? Li Tianlan was completely baffled. What did it mean that after entering the Wang family of Beihai, in Yuetong's eyes, he was working for another woman? Wang Yuetong was the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. What did it mean? Wang Tianzong took a deep look at Qin Weibai. Perhaps he was the only one who vaguely understood what Qin Weibai's seemingly wrong words actually meant. Li Tianlan naturally couldn't understand, but he didn't think much about it. He reached out and touched Qin Weibai's hair and said softly, go take a bath. Qin Weibai nodded obediently. Li Tianlan glanced at Wang Tianzong and said, Your Majesty, rest early. Then he turned around and left with Qin Weibai and Dongqing Rushi. Wang Tianzong stood outside the door and looked at their backs. Until they disappeared, he slowly turned around and went back to his room. You're moved. When returning to the room, Qin Weibai's first words revealed Li Tianlan's psychological state very straightforwardly. For a moment I was indeed moved. Li Tianlan sat on the sofa and sighed. He looked at Qin Weibai and then at Dongqing Rushi. Dongqing Rushi was still pouting. Noticing Li Tianlan's gaze, she wrinkled her nose and said, I'll run the bath. Qin Weibai looked at Dongqing Rushi's figure with a smile and said softly, It's normal. You've had a lot of ups and downs tonight. Especially when you were forced to compromise by the Wang family of Beihai. You felt even more frustrated. If I'm not mistaken, before this, Wang Tianzong should have given you some pressure, right? Wang Tianzong has always wanted you to enter the Wang family of Beihai. Tonight was a trap he set up. When he talked about this topic with you, your mental state was already not perfect, and he took the initiative to talk about the people and things you care about. In this way, there were more flaws. Besides, there was something wrong with the cup of tea you drank. In this way, Wang Tianzong could naturally hypnotize you. I just didn't expect Sword Emperor to hypnotize. Li Tianlan laughed at himself. There are also masters in the spiritual field. Wang Tianzong doesn't care about these, and he's not proficient in them. If it was summer solstice who came tonight, I guess you really can't turn back now. Qin Weibai shook her head. But this state is also very rare for you. Usually, even the Pope can't do anything to you, let alone summer solstice. Li Tianlan nodded. When he was about to speak, his face suddenly changed. His eyes fell on the coffee table. At this moment, there were 3 teacups on the coffee table. One teacup was Li Tianlan's tea, and a glass of juice was Dongqing Rushi's drink. In addition, there was a teacup with half a cup of tea in it. Li Tianlan's eyes shifted to Qin Weibai's hand. Qin Weibai held a cup in her hand and quietly drank water. Li Tianlan frowned and suddenly said, "Someone was here just now." Qin Weibai didn't seem surprised. She just said casually, "Who?" Li Tianlan didn't speak. He picked up the remote control in front of him and directly called up the surveillance of the office of the president. There was no surveillance in his room, but there were cameras in every corner of the office of the president. The picture on the screen passed quickly. At a certain moment, the picture suddenly paused for a moment, and then continued to play. Then it paused for a moment. Someone must have tampered with the parts that are stuck. Qin Weibai suddenly said. Li Tianlan was silent. He naturally knew this as well. The picture continued to pass. Then Dongqing Rushi walked out of the room and walked to the office of the president. Li Tianlan suddenly paused the picture. On the picture, Dongqing Rushi walked quietly. There was no one around her, but she suddenly nodded. Li Tianlan frowned suddenly. Such a situation could only mean that there was someone around Dongqing Rushi, but he didn't appear in the surveillance. And the person who could do this so perfectly could only be an invincible realm expert. Moreover, he and Wang Tianzong were both in the office of the president, but they didn't find anyone using the power of the invincible realm, which could only mean that this person's control of power had reached the peak. The invincible realm, or even the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan frowned. He didn't notice that when he frowned, Qin Weibai, who lowered her head to drink water, had a very sharp light in her eyes. Dongqing Rushi put the bathwater in and walked out. She turned her head and glanced at the screen. Seeing that Li Tianlan was looking through the surveillance video, she was stunned. Her own figure appeared on the screen. She was walking in the direction of the outside of the office of the president. Dongqing Rushi suddenly said, "I didn't get it." "Rushi, did someone come here just now?" Li Tianlan asked. "Yes." Dongqing Rushi nodded. "He said he wanted to talk to you." Li Tianlan had vaguely guessed who it was, but he still asked, "Who?" "The Purgatory of Heaven Capital, deity." Dongqing Rushi said seriously, "He asked me a lot of questions, but I didn't tell him." Li Tianlan was silent for a while. For a moment, he didn't know if the missed meeting this time would make him miss other opportunities. Suddenly, the bell rang in the room. The sound of the bell reverberated, lingering in the air. Li Tianlan looked at his watch, then picked up his phone and dialed a number. The phone was quickly connected, and a rough voice sounded. "Your Highness?" This was the voice of Li Zhonghu, the commander of the Thunderbolt Division of the Snowdance Corps. Li Tianlan said, Where are they?" 10 minutes to reach the destination." Li Zhonghu opened his mouth and laughed. Li Tianlan grunted and said, "Let's make it quick." He silently put down the phone. His expression was not relaxed, but more and more solemn. "Where are they?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked. Li Tianlan didn't answer the question. "They'll be here soon, about 10 minutes. Qin Weibai said. Some people set off from here and regarded another point as their destination. The people who went there would arrive at their destination immediately. In this case, the people who set off from another point and regarded this place as their destination would certainly arrive soon." Li Tianlan pressed the screen. He looked at the scene of the block near the Caesar Hotel, and was silent for a long time. No one didn't admire Paul's courage. In an absolutely serious situation, surrounded by enemies and with 6 invincible realm experts eyeing him covetously, not everyone dared to ask if they all wanted to die. When he asked this question, his expression was extremely indifferent. The biggest impression that the current patriarch of Rothschild left on the dark world was his gentle and quiet character. But when he really wanted to kill, even King Tong, who was closest to him, could feel that there was an extremely piercing coldness gathering and spreading around him. "Your Highness Paul, we have reason to believe that Rothschild has a close connection with Hell, the largest terrorist organization in Eastern Europe. The men in black have already got the evidence. Not long ago, I received a call from Prime Minister Riker of Wulon State. He asked the men in black to cooperate with Wulon State's action to fight against terrorists. Of course, you have the right to resist, but if there is any misunderstanding, we still hope that you can come back to the office of the president with us. The Invincible Realm experts and elites of the major forces were getting closer and closer to Paul. In the crowd, Cass Rotter's deep voice suddenly sounded. His tone was calm, but his voice was extremely cold. As the most loyal servant of God, Rothschild has turned his back on the glory of God in recent years. Your Highness Paul, His Majesty the Pope thinks that it is necessary for you to go back to the European Holy Land with me to explain some of the crimes that you and Rothschild have committed. Otherwise, His Majesty will announce to the world after dawn that Rothschild is the biggest heretic of the Vatican. You and your family will be judged by the Vatican. Mellad walked over with a cold and solemn expression. His Highness Arsis is already on his way. Your Highness Paul, your resistance is meaningless. On behalf of His Highness Charlemagne, I'll send Rothschild off. In the direction of the Heroes Club, Mitchell's whole body was shrouded in a black cloud, and his voice was gentle. You can surrender, Your Highnesses. His Highness Li Tianlan is still very hospitable. Qin Shilai's mind gradually calmed down, and he said in a calm tone. Paul looked at the crowd getting closer and closer with cold eyes. His expression was extremely indifferent. All the high-sounding words turned into Bulsh *T in his ears. His voice was cold and steady. He repeated, Do you all want to die? No one spoke. But everyone's heart suddenly froze. Rothschild was one of the oldest forces in the Dark World, but the people in the Dark World only had the impression of King Tong. Paul was the patriarch, but he was also a businessman. No one in the Dark World was familiar with his style, so naturally, they did not dare to act rashly. So the scene began to become a stalemate. Time passed slowly in the long stalemate. Paul stared at the Invincible Realm experts of the major forces calmly, and the killing intent in his eyes grew stronger and stronger. He's stalling for time. Mellad suddenly said. Everyone, don't give him a chance. He was a follower and also the second leader of the Holy Disarmament Corps, but in the end he was just himself. The situation tonight was extremely tense and sensitive. Although it seemed that their side had won, Paul's face was calm from beginning to end. No one in the world dared to look down on Rothschild. Similarly, no one dared to look down on the patriarch of Rothschild. In such a situation, Mellad did not want Rothschild to have the slightest possibility of turning the tables. The most correct thing to do was to solve everything as soon as possible. You're a clown. How can you represent the Vatican? Paul suddenly sneered. His eyes swept around, and his eyes with killing intent stopped on the Invincible Realm experts. Since you all want to die, I'll send you on your way. His figure suddenly took a step forward. Almost at the same time, King Tong, who had been standing beside him and looked very obedient and silent, moved forward at the same time. Two thick shadows suddenly filled the night sky. King Tong's figure was tense, and she opened her domain with all her strength. Unique skill. Shadow Kingdom. Paul's figure strode forward in the Shadow Kingdom, and a thick and obscure light enveloped his whole body. His figure was getting faster and faster, and he directly rushed to the second in command of the Heroes Club, Mitchell, who was the weakest in his perception. Unique skill. Shadow Slaughter. Chapter 501. Every superpower with a long history had its own style. Style was a fixed thing, and it was also the most obvious label. Such a style would often be reflected in all aspects, such as behavior, dressing, temperament, and even martial arts. The unparalleled explosive power of the Wang family of Beihai was their martial arts style. The Li family and the Lin clan's kendo were the fiercest. The Jiang family of South America's martial arts defense was the best in the world. In close combat, the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican was invincible. Only powerful forces like the Samsara Palace and the Polar Ground Alliance, which had been established for a short time, did not have their own style for the time being. In a sense, this was also a strong evidence of the lack of foundation. The Shadow Throne had not been established for a long time. Countless internal games and struggles had wasted a lot of time. It was not until the last 100 years that the Shadow Throne had really matured. But Rothschild had existed much longer than the establishment of the Shadow Throne. As the strongest and oldest super-wealthy family in the Dark World, Rothschild also had its own martial arts style. Being with the Shadow, Rothschild's martial arts were not lethal, and its defense was not outstanding enough. But it was extremely weird and unpredictable. With Paul's current realm, which was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, he could be said to be the strongest patriarch in Rothschild in the past few hundred years. No one dared to despise such a figure. This was also the main reason why no one took the lead to take action, although all the superpowers were present. So in the seemingly incompetent but necessary stalemate, Paul, who had already surprised everyone tonight, once again surprised everyone. Several invincible realm experts joined hands. The elites of all the superpowers were present. Outside was the vast army of Wulon State. In such a situation, Paul directly broke the stalemate and took the lead. King Tong, who had been quietly restraining her sharpness beside her brother, suddenly burst out with all her strength the moment Paul took action. The domain formed by the Shadow Kingdom seemed to tear up the surrounding space. Thick gray shadows twisted wildly and rushed over. In the blink of an eye, they had spread to a distance of hundreds of meters. The twisted shadows swept past Paul and enveloped the surroundings. Paul's figure, who was striding forward, flickered for a moment and then disappeared. In an instant, at the forefront of the Heroes Club, Mitchell's hair stood on end. Everyone, ah! Just as his voice rang out, an incomparably shrill scream suddenly rang out behind him. A large amount of liquid splattered behind Mitchell. It was incomparably viscous. The night rain in the air was incomparably cold, but this liquid was so warm, so scarlet and sweet. A vague silhouette appeared behind Mitchell. The moment the outline appeared, the bodies of the two thundershocking realm experts of the Heroes Club who were closest to Mitchell suddenly burst into large pieces of flesh and blood. These two people were obviously not the targets of Paul's attack, but two obstacles. In the shadow, his figure was extremely blurry, but he tore the two thundershocking realm experts into pieces at an extremely fast speed. His speed didn't slow down at all, and he directly stepped into Mitchell's domain. Invincible realm? Paul suddenly spoke, seemingly a little surprised. Mitchell was not famous in the Heroes Club. He could only be considered an ordinary member of the upper echelon. The only thing that made him different was that he was the closest to President Charlemagne. However, according to the secret intelligence of the major forces, Mitchell should only have the combat capability of the invincible realm, and had not really broken through to the invincible realm. In theory, the combat capability of the invincible realm could be said to be the top expert of the half-step invincible realm. But the moment Paul stepped into Mitchell's domain, he found that it was not the kind of pseudo-domain that was infinitely close to the real domain. It was the real domain of the invincible realm. Obviously, Mitchell had completely broken through the natural moat and become a real expert of the invincible realm. No wonder. Paul muttered to himself and moved forward again. Mitchell's domain was completely useless. At this moment, Mitchell used his strongest unique skill, but he couldn't stop Paul at all. When he took the third step, the domain around Mitchell completely collapsed in an instant. The vague silhouette of Paul disappeared from his sight. But a huge and deadly danger suddenly came from all directions. Mitchell rushed forward completely out of instinct. His body rushed out at least 20 meters, and he even rolled on the ground in embarrassment. But before he could stand up, in a shrill scream, a large amount of blood rain flew up. In the shadow, Paul's figure was vague and sharp. All the experts of the Heroes Club standing between him and Mitchell, no matter what realm they were in, turned into a rain of blood in the blink of an eye. Before Mitchell could catch his breath, Paul, who was almost completely invisible, had appeared in front of him again. Almost no one in the Dark World had seen Paul's real attack. Occasionally, some people were lucky enough to see it, but they all died silently. So no one had seen the Shadow Slaughter. To some extent, this was the first appearance of the Shadow Slaughter in the Dark World. Any unique skill that could be famous in the Dark World seemed to need to be stained with blood when it appeared for the first time. Paul's figure flashed to Mitchell's side. His palm was slightly bent, like a sharp claw that could tear everything. The moment his arm cut through the air, There was a harsh sonic boom. The air was torn apart. When the sound came from behind, Paul's claw-like palm had directly appeared above Mitchell's head. Bang! There was a dull sound, but there was no blood. An incomparably thick black shadow suddenly appeared under Paul's claws. The black shadow squirmed and expanded, directly enveloping Mitchell. Paul's claws rubbed against the black shadow, making a dull sound, and even bringing up a dazzling spark. Paul's eyes narrowed. Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights, appeared beside Mitchell. When Paul narrowed his eyes, he picked up the Dark Saint spear that covered Mitchell. The Dark Saint spear, which was famous in the Dark World, had completely turned into a mass of liquid that could change constantly during the charging period. As Raphael raised his palm, the shield-shaped Dark Saint spear changed crazily, and finally turned into a huge hammer that was 2 kilometers long. Raphael waved the hammer in his hand. Without any nonsense, he smashed the hammer directly at Paul's head. Paul sneered and took a step back. His figure flashed. But the shadow and the pure light lit up at the same time. The unique skill of the Vatican. The light was boundless. In the shadow, countless pure beams of light floated up in an instant. The dense beams of light continued to expand in the shadow, dispersing the shadow. Paul's figure appeared clearly in everyone's sight. Mellad strode forward without hesitation. His eyes were full of seriousness. This was the first time that the Shadow Slaughter had appeared in the Dark World. However, he could clearly see the absolute destructive power of this unique skill. Rothschild and the Vatican were mortal enemies. To some extent, Paul's Shadow Slaughter was aimed at Arcis. Arcis was very strong. As one of the few experts at the peak of the invincible realm in the Dark World, Arcis was best at close combat. In other words, the martial arts of the Vatican were best at close combat. In a one-on-one close combat, Arcis was not even afraid of Wang Tianzong without Listen to the Sea. It was no exaggeration to say that Arcis was now the strongest person in close combat in the entire Dark World. In the entire Dark World, there might be only one unique skill that could compete with Arcis in close combat without falling into a disadvantageous position. Dragon Fist. The Dragon Fist of the Lin clan and the Li family. Only the Dragon Fist. But the Dragon Fist was the unique skill of the Invincible Manual in the map of God of War. For hundreds of years, except for the ancestors of the Lin clan, none of the Invincible Realm experts of the Lin clan and the Li family had practiced the Invincible Manual. Although there was Li Tianlan now, Li Tianlan was far from growing up. Therefore, in this field, Arcis was still the strongest, second to none. At this moment, Paul's Shadow Slaughter was also extremely strange. And it was also a close combat. After being crowned by the Pope, Mellad was already in the Invincible Realm, and his real strength was close to the peak of the Invincible Realm. He was not much weaker than Paul. He could be said to be one of the people with the highest realm in the field, so he could naturally see how terrifying this Shadow Slaughter was. In terms of lethality and ferocity, Paul's Shadow Slaughter was far inferior to Arcis's. But this unique skill was too fast, extremely strange, and the angle was tricky. In close combat, this kind of unique skill could be said to be the best unique skill for the weak to defeat the strong. Therefore, Mellad could only choose to make a move. If he didn't make a move at this time, Paul's Shadow Slaughter had the possibility of defeating several Invincible Realm experts present one by one. Even Arcis might be seriously injured. In this state, Paul had not yet reached the peak of the Invincible Realm. But with this unique skill, his lethality had firmly reached that field. Mellad naturally didn't care about Arcis's life or death, but it was also His Majesty's plan to destroy Rothschild. How could he delay it? Therefore, in the chaos of Eastern Europe, on the battlefield of the Invincible Realm, facing Paul, who was at the peak of the Invincible Realm, the first to make a move and join hands were the sworn enemies of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican and the commander of the Dark Knights. The light of countless scenes expanded wildly. Mellad's sudden attack directly showed all the strength he could show at this time in his realm. Countless huge pillars of light suddenly exploded after expanding to the limit. The light scattered and fell like rain. The pure and broken light almost completely illuminated the night sky. Countless rays of light seemed to become a piece of pure water that kept fluctuating. Under the light, Paul's figure became clearer than ever. The huge black hammer in Raphael's hand fell to the ground, and the long street suddenly shook. The dense cracks on the street spread in all directions. The huge force shattered the shops on both sides of the road. Smoke and dust also fell to the ground with broken glass. There was a loud roar. Raphael was expressionless. He held the hammer in his hand tightly and suddenly waved it. The hammer cut through the air and made an extremely loud and dull sound. The dark saint's spear suddenly changed in the air. It turned into a huge black long saber. Raphael held the long saber in his hand and rushed directly to Paul. After a moment of hesitation, everyone made a move at the same time. There was no nonsense. Kassrotter, Huan Kong, Qin Shilai, and Mitchell all rushed to Paul without hesitation. Since the beginning of the chaos in Eastern Europe tonight, this was the first time that many Invincible Realm experts had besieged one person at the same time. The battlefield that only belonged to the Invincible Realm had completely opened in the violent battle. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.